This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I still can't bring myself to drive at night anymore, especially not on empty highways. It's been 8 months since that night on Highway 61, and I've had to completely change my life because of it. I've turned down job opportunities, missed family events, and even started seeing a therapist, but nothing helps. I know what I experienced, and no amount of rational explanation can make sense of it. I was driving back from a business conference in Las Vegas last December. It had been a successful trip. I'd made some good connections and was feeling pretty optimistic about some potential contracts. The conference wrapped up around 3 in the afternoon, and I decided to head home instead of staying another night. My boss had already left the previous day, and I was eager to get back to my own bed. When I was checking out of the hotel, the receptionist asked about my route home. I mentioned taking Highway 61 through the desert, and her expression changed immediately. "You're not planning to drive that at night, are you?" she asked. I told her I'd probably be on that stretch around sunset, but should clear it before it got completely dark. She just shook her head. "We call that Dead Man's Highway," she said. "That 120-mile stretch has more fatal accidents per mile than almost anywhere else in Nevada. If you can, try to be off it before dark." I thanked her for the concern but didn't think much of it. I'd driven plenty of desert highways before, and I was confident in my abilities. Besides, my SUV was only 2 years old and in perfect condition. The first couple hours of the drive were completely normal. The desert landscape was beautiful in that stark, empty way, and the sky was turning those incredible shades of orange and purple that you only get in the desert. I had my playlist going, the AC keeping me comfortable, and was making good time. Everything changed around mile marker 87. First, I noticed my cell phone had no service, which wasn't that unusual for remote desert highways. Then my music cut out, replaced by static. I tried changing stations but got nothing but white noise across the dial. I switched to Bluetooth to play music from my phone instead, but even that sounded distant and distorted. I checked my gas gauge, still over half a tank, and kept driving. The sun was setting faster than I expected, the light fading quickly. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard. 6:47 p.m. I figured I had maybe another hour of decent light. That's when I noticed the mile marker again, 87. I frowned, certain I'd passed mile marker 87 a few minutes earlier. I must have misread it, I thought. I kept driving. 10 minutes later, another mile marker, 87. My stomach tightened. I checked my odometer to confirm I was still moving forward. I was. I'd gone about 7 miles since I first noticed the marker. This made no sense. I focused on the road ahead, trying to convince myself I was just tired and misreading the signs. The desert was getting dark now, that deep blue darkness that comes right after sunset. I switched on my headlights and noticed the temperature display on my dashboard had dropped from 76 degrees to 58 in the span of minutes. Desert temperatures do drop at night, but not that quickly. Then I saw headlights in my rearview mirror. A dark blue sedan appeared behind me, maintaining the exact same distance no matter how I adjusted my speed. When I slowed to 60, it slowed. When I accelerated to 80, it matched me perfectly. It wasn't close enough to be threatening, just persistent. I couldn't make out the driver through the windshield. The sedan's headlights were unusually bright, making it impossible to see inside the vehicle. As I drove, a pickup truck approached from the opposite direction. I was relieved to see another vehicle on this empty stretch. But as it passed me, something impossible happened. It simply vanished. 1 second it was there in my side mirror, the next it was gone. No turn-offs, no dust cloud, nothing. Just gone. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel now. I pressed the accelerator harder, pushing to 90 miles per hour. The blue sedan maintained its exact distance. The radio suddenly switched on by itself, startling me so badly I swerved. Through bursts of static, I caught fragments of what sounded like a weather alert. Highway 61 closure. Fatal accident. Temperatures dropping to. Search crews unable to. Driver missing since. I jabbed at the power button, but the radio continued. I yanked my hand back when the dial felt ice cold to the touch. The car's interior temperature now read 42 degrees, despite my heater running at full blast. Up ahead, something appeared on the road, a figure standing motionless in my lane. I slammed on the brakes, the SUV fishtailing slightly on the asphalt. My headlights illuminated nothing. The figure was gone. Had it ever been there? I sat there, engine idling, trying to calm my racing heart. The blue sedan had stopped too, maintaining that same precise distance behind me. When I looked back at the passenger seat to grab my water bottle, my blood froze. There was a piece of paper there that hadn't been there before. It looked like a printed police report. With shaking hands, I picked it up and read the heading, "Missing Person Report." My name was on it, my vehicle description, my license plate number, and the date of disappearance was 3 years ago. Today's date, but 3 years ago. That's when I looked back at the rearview mirror and saw something that still haunts my nightmares. The driver of the blue sedan had stepped out and was walking toward my car. In the dim glow of my brake lights, I could see their face clearly. It was me, not someone who looked like me. It was me. Same face, same clothes I was wearing right then, but wrong somehow. The eyes were empty, the movements jerky and unnatural. I floored it. The SUV leaped forward, tires screeching, the engine roaring as I pushed it as fast as it would go. I didn't care about speed limits or safety anymore. I just needed to get away. Mile marker 87 flashed by again. I drove like that for what felt like hours, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, constantly checking the mirror for that blue sedan. Sometimes it would disappear, and I'd feel a moment of relief before it would reappear, always at that same distance. The radio kept cutting in and out. Vehicle discovered, no sign of the driver, third disappearance this year on this stretch. Temperatures reaching record lows. I don't remember exactly when I noticed I was crying, the tears freezing on my cheeks in the impossible cold of my car. The dashboard now read 28 degrees. My breath came out in clouds. At some point, I couldn't tell you what time it was because my dashboard clock was now flashing 12 hours over and over. I saw lights ahead. Not headlights, but the fluorescent glow of a service station. I've never felt such desperate relief in my life. I pulled in, the blue sedan nowhere to be seen. The station looked old but operational, with a single attendant visible through the window. I practically fell out of my car, my legs numb from tension and cold. The attendant was an older man with deeply lined skin and eyes that had seen too much desert sun. He looked surprised to see anyone at this hour. "You okay there?" he asked, taking in my disheveled appearance. I tried to explain what had happened, the words tumbling out in a jumbled mess about mile markers and doppelgangers and vanishing trucks. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly concerned. When I mentioned mile marker 87 repeatedly appearing, he shook his head. "There ain't no mile marker 87 on Highway 61, he said quietly. "Never has been. It goes from 86 straight to 88. Old surveying error they never bothered to fix." I insisted I'd seen it, multiple times. He just looked at me with pity. "What day is it?" I asked, suddenly needing to know. "Thursday, December 15th, he replied. I had left Las Vegas on Monday the 12th. 3 days. I'd lost 3 days. I used the station's phone to call my family, who had reported me missing when I failed to return home or contact anyone. My car was almost out of gas, despite having over half a tank when this started. The police came, took my statement, and obviously didn't believe a word of it. They suspected I'd had some kind of breakdown or amnesia episode. I've spent months trying to make sense of what happened that night. I've researched Highway 61, found stories of other strange experiences, other disappearances. Some people who went missing were found days later with no memory of where they'd been. Others were never found at all. I still have the police report that appeared in my car. I keep it locked in my desk drawer, afraid to look at it, but equally afraid to get rid of it. The date on it is still 3 years in the past. Sometimes I have dreams where I'm driving that endless loop of highway again, passing mile marker 87 over and over. In these dreams, I'm aware that I'm being watched from a blue sedan that follows at a perfect distance. And sometimes in the worst dreams, I realize I'm not the one being followed anymore. I'm the one in the blue sedan watching myself drive. I don't know what happened to me on Highway 61. I don't know if I slipped between times or dimensions, or if I experienced something that has no explanation in our understanding of reality. All I know is that I'll never drive that highway again, especially not as the sun is setting and the desert prepares for night. And if you're ever on a desert highway and see mile marker 87 where it shouldn't be, turn around. No matter what, turn around. Story 2. I've been debating whether to share this for months. I don't expect anyone to believe me, but I need to tell someone before I lose my mind completely. Maybe writing it down will help make sense of what happened, or maybe not. Either way, I need to get this out. In the fall of '89, I accepted a position as head of psychiatry at Glenwood State Hospital in Atchison, Kansas. I was 34, ambitious, and eager to prove myself. The hospital was this massive Victorian monstrosity perched on a hill overlooking the Missouri River, all red brick, narrow windows and sharp angles that somehow looked both imposing and fragile against the autumn sky. I remember thinking it looked like something from a Gothic novel when I first drove up the winding road to the main entrance. The hospital administrator, a thin man named Jenkins with perpetually sweaty palms, gave me the grand tour on my first day. He kept emphasizing how lucky they were to have me, how the previous head psychiatrist, Dr. Coleman, had left so suddenly after more than 2 decades. 22 years without a single complaint, then just gone. Left a resignation letter on my desk and cleaned out his office that weekend. I should have paid more attention to that red flag. But I was too focused on the opportunity, my first major leadership role after years of working under others. My office was spacious but outdated, with dark wood paneling and heavy furniture that looked like it hadn't been moved since the '60s. While organizing my things, I noticed a large file cabinet in the corner. It was locked, with a small brass label that read, "Ward C Restricted." When I asked Jenkins about it, his face did this weird twitching thing. Oh, that. Ward C was closed in '72. Budget cuts. Nothing of importance in there, I'm sure. If you find the key, feel free to clean it out. That night, I had the first dream. I was walking down a dimly lit corridor I didn't recognize. The walls were institutional green, but faded and peeling. I could hear a woman's voice, soft but clear, counting backward. 1,000, 999, 998. The voice was mesmerizing, almost hypnotic. I kept walking toward it, turning corners that shouldn't have been there, until I woke up with my heart pounding. I brushed it off as stress from the move and the new job, but the dream came back the next night and the night after. Each time I got a little closer to the source of the counting. About a week into my new position, I was reviewing patient files when I noticed something strange. Several long-term patients, ones who'd been there for decades, had similar notations in their charts. References to auditory hallucinations, specifically a counting woman. I pulled more files and found the same pattern. One patient, Harold Miller, had been there since 1964. His file noted, patient continues to report hearing female voice counting backward at night. Insists that when she reaches 0, something comes through. Medication increased. I decided to speak with Harold. He was in his 70s by then, a thin man with wispy white hair and surprisingly clear blue eyes. When I mentioned the counting woman, his whole body tensed. "You've heard her too, haven't you?" he whispered, leaning forward in his chair. "I can see it in your face." "I've had some dreams," I admitted, not sure why I was telling a patient about my own experiences. Harold grabbed my wrist. His fingers were bony but strong. "They're not dreams. She's real. Catherine Doyle. She's been counting for decades, and when she reaches 0, he shuddered. The people who hear her to the end, they come back wrong, emptied out, like something else is wearing their skin. I gently removed his hand and tried to redirect the conversation, but Harold kept going, his voice getting more agitated. Jenkins knows, Coleman knew. That's why he left. He heard her getting closer to zero. I spoke with 4 other patients that day. They all mentioned Catherine Doyle. They all talked about counting. And they all warned me about what happens when the counting ends. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that locked file cabinet, about Ward C, about the dreams that didn't feel like dreams. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up and decided to look through Coleman's desk again. In the bottom drawer, hidden beneath some old medical journals, I found a small key with C etched into it. I also found something else, a microcassette tape labeled Doyle C Final Session 6/12/72. I had an old tape player in my apartment. My hands were shaking as I inserted the cassette and pressed play. The recording started with static, then Coleman's voice. Session 27 with Catherine Doyle, June 12, 1972. A woman's voice responded, the same voice from my dreams. You shouldn't have come today, Marshall. It's too close now. Too close to what, Catherine? The end of counting, the opening. They're getting impatient on the other side. Coleman's sigh was audible. Catherine, we've discussed this. There is no other side. These are delusions. There are spaces, Marshall. She interrupted, her voice suddenly intense. Spaces between numbers, between moments, between thoughts. They live in those spaces, watching, waiting. The counting thins the barrier, creates a door. Who are they, Catherine? I don't know what to call them. They don't have names like we do. They exist differently, but they want to be here. They envy us our solidity, our certainty. Then she started counting. 1,999. Coleman tried to interrupt her, but her voice got louder, more insistent. The quality of the recording changed too. A subtle distortion, like air pressure dropping before a storm. I should have turned it off. I knew I should, but I couldn't. Her voice was hypnotic, pulling me in. I sat there, listening to the numbers descend until I must have fallen asleep. The next morning, I woke up on my couch, the tape player silent. I felt strange, lightheaded and disoriented, like I was slightly out of sync with my surroundings. The key with the C engraving was clutched in my hand, the metal warm against my palm. I called in sick that day, which I never do. I spent hours researching Catherine Doyle. There wasn't much online back then, but the local library had newspaper archives. I found her. Catherine Doyle, mathematics professor at a small college in Nebraska, admitted to Glenwood in 1952 after a nervous breakdown. The article mentioned she'd been working on some revolutionary mathematical theory before her breakdown. I also found a Marjorie Wilkins who had worked as a nurse at Glenwood during that period. She was in her 70s, living in a retirement community just outside Atchison. I called and asked if I could visit. She sounded wary but agreed. Marjorie was waiting for me on her porch when I arrived, a small woman with steel gray hair and sharp eyes that assessed me carefully. "You look terrible," she said instead of hello. "You've heard the counting, haven't you?" I sank into the chair opposite her. "How did you know?" I recognized the look. "Like you're only half here." She poured me tea from a floral pot. "I knew you'd come eventually. Someone always does, after Coleman." "What happened to Coleman?" "Same thing that happens to anyone who gets too close to Catherine. He started hearing her. Then he ran." She stirred sugar into her tea. "Smart man. Tell me about Catherine Doyle." Marjorie's face darkened. "Brilliant woman. Too brilliant. She was working on some mathematical sequence she claimed could open doors between worlds. Everyone thought she was crazy until patients started changing." "Changing how?" "It would always happen the same way. Catherine would count backward from 1,000 every night. The patients in rooms near hers would complain about the noise at first. Then they'd become fascinated by it. Then they'd change." She set down her cup. "Hard to explain how. They looked the same, talked the same, but something essential was missing. No emotions, no personality, like empty shells walking around. That's impossible, I said automatically. Is it? You're a psychiatrist. You know the mind can break in strange ways. But this wasn't breaking, it was replacement. By 1959, she told me, they'd isolated Catherine in Ward C, which had been a tuberculosis ward decades earlier. Dr. Coleman took personal responsibility for her care. The counting got worse over the years, Marjorie continued, more intense, more effective. By 72, Coleman knew something had to be done. That was his last session with her. She leaned forward. What happened to the tape? I felt cold. You know about the tape? Coleman made it to document what happened. He played it for me once, years ago. Said if anything happened to him, I should tell whoever came after him to destroy it. I found it. I listened to part of it. Marjorie closed her eyes briefly. Then it's already starting. The counting gets in your head. Once it starts, it's hard to stop. What happened to Catherine Doyle? I asked. Officially? She died in 1972 of heart failure. Unofficially, Coleman sealed Ward C and never spoke of her again. That night I took the key and went back to the hospital. It was quiet, just the night staff making their rounds. I waited until the halls were clear, then made my way to the east wing, where a set of heavy double doors marked the entrance to Ward C. The key fit perfectly. The doors opened with a groan that echoed down the silent corridor. I flicked my flashlight back and forth, illuminating a long hallway with rooms on either side. The air was stale, thick with decades of dust and abandonment. I moved slowly, checking each room. They were all empty, stripped beds, bare walls, forgotten, until I reached C7. The door was different, newer than the others, with heavy locks. My key worked here too. Inside, the room was anything but empty. The walls were covered with calculations, numbers, equations, scrawled in what looked like charcoal, ink, and, in places, blood. They formed patterns that hurt my eyes if I looked at them too long. On the back wall was a perfect circle about 3 feet in diameter. It looked like it had been drawn with incredible precision. But as my flashlight beam hit it, I realized something was wrong. The circle wasn't drawn on the wall. It was a perfect absence, a darkness deeper than shadow, like a hole punched through reality itself. You came. The voice came from behind me. I spun around, nearly dropping my flashlight. She sat on the bed frame, a woman in her 60s with long gray hair and pale, almost translucent skin. Catherine Doyle looked nothing like a woman who had supposedly died almost 20 years earlier. You're not real, I whispered. Neither are boundaries between worlds, if you understand the mathematics. Her smile was gentle. But you're not here for a lesson in theoretical physics, are you, Emily? You're here because of the counting. How do you know my name? I know all about you, just as I knew about Coleman, just as I'll know about whoever comes after you. She patted the bed beside her. Sit. It's almost time. I couldn't move. My body felt frozen in place as Catherine Doyle began to count. 1,000. Her voice was soft but filled the room completely. 999. The circle on the wall seemed to pulse with each number, darkening, deepening. 998. I tried to turn away, to run, but my muscles wouldn't respond. 997. The counting continued, and with each number the circle grew darker, more defined. I could feel something on the other side, watching, waiting. 996. The air in the room grew cold, so cold my breath clouded in front of me. 995. I felt a pressure building in my head, like something was trying to push its way in through my ears, my eyes, my mouth. 994. The circle wasn't empty anymore. There was movement within it, shapes that made no sense to my human eyes. 993. I don't remember anything after that, not clearly. Fragments come back sometimes. impressions of movement, of cold, of voices that weren't voices. The next thing I really remember is sitting in the hospital cafeteria 3 days later, Jenkins standing over me with a concerned expression. They tell me I was found wandering the halls, unresponsive except for numbers that I kept muttering under my breath. They tell me I had a psychotic break brought on by stress. They transferred me to another facility for rest. That was over 30 years ago. I'm better now, they say, functional. I work in a small private practice, seeing patients with anxiety and depression, normal problems, safe problems. But every night at midnight I start counting. I can't help it. The numbers come unbidden, flowing out of me like they're being pulled by an invisible force. 1,999, 998. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I catch a glimpse of something else looking back at me from behind my eyes. Something patient, something waiting. The counting is getting closer to 0. I can feel it, and I don't know what will happen when it finally reaches the end. Story 3. I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about what I found in that basement. It's been over 10 years now, but some nights I still can't sleep without checking all the locks in my house twice. 3 times on bad nights. Back in October 2011, I was just a regular cop in Crestwood, Pennsylvania, a quiet little town where nothing much happened. I'd been with the department for about 3 years by then. Our police station was this old Victorian mansion that had been converted decades ago. It had all these weird little nooks and rooms that didn't make sense, but it had character, I guess. That morning started like any other. I needed to pull a case file for a petty theft at the convenience store. Routine stuff. The evidence room was in the basement, which was always freezing cold no matter what time of year. I remember I was wearing my department-issued jacket because the heating never quite reached down there. As I was digging through the files, I felt this weird draft on the back of my neck. At first, I ignored it. Old buildings have drafts, right? But it kept bothering me, like someone breathing down my neck. I turned around and noticed it was coming from behind this massive metal shelving unit that had been there forever. It was one of those industrial steel things bolted to the wall, filled with old evidence boxes. I walked over and felt around the edges. The draft was definitely coming from behind it. I squeezed into the gap between the shelf and the wall, and that's when I saw it. The edge of a door frame. Not like a normal door you'd see in the building. This looked added later, retrofitted, and instead of our standard electronic card readers that were on every secure door in the building, this one had an old-school padlock on it. Heavy duty, serious business. I stood there for a good minute just staring at it. Why would there be a hidden door in the evidence room? And why lock it with a padlock instead of the electronic system that tracked every entry? Something felt off, but I figured there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe old records, storage. The building had been around forever. I went upstairs to find Lieutenant Holloway. He'd been with the department for over 20 years, so I figured he'd know what was behind the door. When I walked into his office and told him what I'd found, his whole demeanor changed. I'd never seen him like that before. His face went from normal to this tight, controlled expression. His eyes got hard, and he set his coffee mug down so firmly I thought it might crack. "That area's off limits," he said, not looking at me directly. "Contains sensitive materials from before your time. Nothing you need to concern yourself with." I remember feeling like I was suddenly on thin ice. I was just wondering if I should have access for... He cut me off. "You shouldn't have been poking around back there in the first place. Focus on your current case's merit. That's an order." I left his office feeling weird about the whole thing. On my way out, Teresa Vasquez, who'd been with the department for about 15 years, pulled me aside in the hallway. She had this look on her face, part worry, part warning. "Drop it, James," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "For your family's sake, just focus on your own cases." That stopped me cold. For my family's sake. What the hell did that mean? I had a wife and a 4-year-old daughter at home. The way she said it felt like a threat. but Teresa had always been friendly to me before. We'd had barbecues together, for Christ's sake. I nodded and mumbled something about getting back to work, but inside, alarm bells were going off. That wasn't normal. None of this was normal. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things. Small things at first. I'd walk into the break room and conversations would stop. I'd get assigned to patrols on the outskirts of town, miles from backup. When I did call for assistance, it would take twice as long as usual for anyone to show up. I wasn't being paranoid. They were watching me, and they were isolating me. I couldn't let it go. Something was very wrong, and every instinct I had as a cop was screaming at me. So I started digging into the department's history on my own time. Public records, old newspaper articles, anything I could get my hands on without raising flags. What I found made my stomach turn. Between 1992 and 1998, 7 people had gone missing in Crestwood, all of them between 17 and 25 years old. All cases unsolved. The chief back then was Douglas Verner, and his second in command was Robert Holloway, our current Lieutenant Holloway's father. The more I dug, the worse it got. 5 of the 7 missing persons had last been seen being questioned by Crestwood officers. Witnesses reported seeing them getting into police cruisers. And then, nothing. They vanished. I couldn't sleep after finding that out. I kept thinking about that locked door in the basement, about Holloway's reaction, about Teresa's warning. By November 14th, I'd made up my mind. I was working the overnight shift, just me and a dispatcher who usually dozed off around 2 in the morning. I brought bolt cutters from home tucked into my gym bag. At 3:15 a.m., I went down to the basement with my heart hammering so hard I could barely breathe. The building was silent except for the hum of the old fluorescent lights and the occasional creak of settling wood. I squeezed behind that shelf again and cut through the padlock. It made a louder sound than I expected when it snapped, and I froze, waiting to see if anyone had heard. Nothing. I pulled the door open. It was heavy and made this awful scraping sound against the concrete floor. Behind it was a room about 15 feet square. No windows. A single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling that I turned on with a pull chain. What I saw inside, I still have nightmares about it. It was like walking into a museum of horror that had been organized with bureaucratic precision. 7 metal evidence boxes were arranged on a table against the far wall. Each one had a name written on it in neat block letters. I recognized those names from my research, the missing persons. But seeing them there, in that hidden room, made my blood run cold. I opened the first box with shaking hands. Inside were personal items that should have been returned to the families years ago. A silver necklace with a cross pendant. A worn leather wallet with a driver's license for Michael Tanner, age 19, reported missing in March 1993. A wristwatch that had stopped at 11:47. Beneath those items was clothing, a flannel shirt with dark brown stains, blood, old blood, and something worse. Photos, Polaroids of Michael, his face bruised, tied to a chair in what looked like an old cabin. I went through each box one by one, feeling sicker with each discovery. Jewelry, IDs, clothing with bloodstains, and photos, always photos. In the corner was a filing cabinet. It was locked, but after coming this far, I wasn't stopping. I broke it open with a screwdriver from my toolkit. Inside were handwritten journals, different handwriting in each one, like they'd been passed around. They detailed interrogation sessions with each of the missing persons. The entries started professional, almost clinical. Subject questioned about activities on October 3rd, but they devolved quickly. Applied pressure to obtain cooperation. Physical persuasion required. The final entries were the most disturbing, documenting exactly how each person died during these interrogations and how their bodies were disposed of in abandoned mine shafts outside of town. I found myself sitting on the floor at one point, unable to stand, just trying to breathe. These were cops, my colleagues, people I worked with every day. The worst part was the photos. not just of the victims, but of the officers with them. Officers I recognized, just younger versions. Lieutenant Holloway was in several, standing next to his father. The current chief, William Dalton, was in a few. Teresa was in one, looking away from the camera. I knew I couldn't just report this up the chain of command. The chain was compromised. I took photos of everything with my phone. The boxes, the journals, the Polaroids, everything that proved what had happened. Then I carefully put everything back exactly as I'd found it, replaced the padlock with one I'd bought that looked similar, and left. That night I contacted the Pennsylvania State Police Bureau of Criminal Investigation. I didn't trust anyone local. I met with an investigator named Ramirez in a diner 30 miles away and showed him what I'd found. He looked at my photos for a long time without saying anything. "You understand what you're doing?" he finally asked me. "These are your colleagues, your department." "They're murderers," I said, "and they're using badges to cover it up." The state police moved fast after that. They installed hidden surveillance in the department that confirmed everything. Holloway and Chief Dalton were actively maintaining the cover-up. They caught them on tape discussing how to handle me if I kept asking questions. When the state police finally raided our department, the room was empty. Everything was gone, but they had my photos, the surveillance recordings, and most importantly, they had me. I testified to everything I'd seen. The case broke wide open when they brought in former Chief Werner for questioning. He was old now, sick with cancer, and I think he wanted to clear his conscience before he died. He confessed to everything, how the department had systematically eliminated young people who had witnessed officers trafficking drugs or caught them in corruption. They found 5 of the 7 bodies eventually, buried deep in those abandoned mines. So many officers went to prison. Holloway, Dalton, Teresa, people I'd worked alongside for years, people I'd trusted. As for me, the harassment started immediately. Death threats. Someone shot through my living room window one night while my daughter was watching TV. The couch where she'd been sitting seconds before had a bullet hole in it. That was when I knew we couldn't stay. We're in witness protection now. New names, new town, new lives. Before we left, I met with the families of the victims. I'll never forget what the mother of Sarah Mills, the youngest victim at 17, said to me, "You gave us the gift of certainty. Even terrible truth is better than hopeful ignorance." I became a cop because I believed in justice. What happened in Crestwood was the perversion of everything that badge is supposed to represent. Sometimes I drive by police stations in my new town and wonder what secrets they might be hiding behind their walls. I've heard they put up a memorial plaque with the victims' names on the outside of the old station. Nobody wants to use the building anymore. It sits empty now. I still check my locks 3 times on bad nights. I still wake up sweating, thinking about what was in those boxes. I still wonder if they'll find me someday. But I'd do it all again. Those 7 people deserved justice. They deserved to be more than secrets locked away behind a wall. Story 4. I've been debating whether to share this for months. Even typing it out now, my hands are shaking a bit. I'm not usually the type to believe in the supernatural or anything like that. I've always been pretty logical, the kind of person who needs to see something to believe it. But what happened to me last year in the Sierra Nevada mountains, I still can't explain it. I'm an experienced hiker, been doing solo trips for about 7 years now, ever since I finished college. It's my escape from the chaos of everyday life. No cell phones, no emails, just me and nature. Usually, it's the most peaceful experience imaginable. In July of 2021, I decided to take a 4-day solo hiking trip through a less traveled section of the Sierra Nevada range. I'd been stressed with work, and after being cooped up during the pandemic, I desperately needed some time away from everything. I'd researched the route thoroughly, packed all the essentials, and left my itinerary with my sister, as I always do for safety. The first day was absolutely perfect. I hit the trailhead around 6 in the morning. The air was crisp, the sky was clear, and I felt that familiar rush of excitement I always get at the start of a hike. The trail began in a dense forest of massive pines and gradually opened up to incredible vistas of the mountain range. I took my time, stopping to photograph wildflowers and a deer that crossed my path about a mile in. By midday, I'd made good progress, moving through alpine meadows where the grass rippled in the breeze like waves. I remember feeling so alive, so connected to everything. That's what I've always loved about hiking alone, that sense of being part of something bigger than yourself. But around 2 in the afternoon, something changed. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. The mountains still towered majestically around me, the trail was still clear, but something felt off. The birds had stopped singing, the constant background noise of insects had disappeared. It was completely silent in a way that wilderness never is. I stopped walking and just stood there, listening. Nothing. Not even the sound of the wind in the trees. Just this heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to press against my eardrums. I tried to shake off the uneasiness, telling myself it was probably just a weather change coming, maybe a storm brewing somewhere beyond the peaks. I pushed on, aiming to reach this small mountain lake I'd marked on my map as my first night's camping spot. When I got there around 4:30, it was even more beautiful than I'd expected. Crystal clear water reflecting the surrounding peaks like a mirror. Under normal circumstances, I would have been ecstatic, maybe even jumped in for a quick swim despite the cold. But that silence was still there, and now I felt something else, like I was being watched. I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the tree line, expecting to see another hiker or maybe a deer. But there was nothing. Just trees and rocks in that damn silence. I chose a small clearing about 50 feet from the shore to set up camp. As I pitched my tent, I kept getting this crawling sensation on the back of my neck. You know that feeling when someone's staring at you? It was exactly like that, but magnified tenfold. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself I was being ridiculous, that I was just not used to being alone after all the lockdowns. As the sun began to set, I got a fire going. Usually, a campfire is my favorite part of hiking, the warmth, the light, the comforting crackle. But that night, the flames seemed to cast weird, elongated shadows that moved in ways they shouldn't have. I kept seeing shapes at the corner of my vision, but when I'd turn to look directly, there'd be nothing there. I forced myself to eat some dinner, though my appetite had vanished. As darkness fell completely, I noticed another strange thing. There were no stars. It wasn't cloudy. The sky was just empty, black, like someone had draped a dark curtain over the entire world. I was about to retreat to my tent when I heard it. A whisper. So faint I thought I'd imagined it. But then it came again, a little louder. I couldn't make out words exactly, more like the cadence of speech. It seemed to be coming from the forest beyond my campsite. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding pathetically small. "Is someone there?" No response, just more whispers, now seeming to come from multiple directions. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam around the perimeter of my camp. Nothing moved in the harsh light, but the whispering didn't stop. If anything, it grew more insistent. I convinced myself it was just the wind in the trees, though deep down I knew there was no wind, not a breath of it. The air was completely still. I decided the best thing to do was get some sleep. I doused the fire and zipped myself into my tent, using my headlamp to read a bit, hoping to distract myself. Eventually, exhaustion won out over fear, and I drifted off into an uneasy sleep. I jolted awake to a tremendous crash. Outside my tent, my watch said it was 2:17 in the morning. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The crash had sounded like something large had fallen, a tree maybe, or a boulder. But there was something else too. The whispers had grown louder, more distinct. I grabbed my flashlight with shaking hands and, after a moment's hesitation, unzipped my tent. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing out of the ordinary. No fallen trees, no boulders, just the same clearing, the same lake shimmering under that starless sky. But the whispering, God, the whispering. It sounded like dozens of voices now, all talking over each other in urgent, hushed tones. I still couldn't make out words, but the sound was unmistakably human, and it seemed to be coming from everywhere: the trees, the lake, even from under the ground. I retreated into my tent, zipping it shut as if that thin layer of nylon could protect me from whatever was out there. I didn't sleep again that night. I just lay there, listening to those voices, clutching my knife. Not that I thought it would help against whatever this was. As soon as the first hint of dawn lightened the sky, I packed up camp. My hands were clumsy with fear and lack of sleep, but I managed to get everything into my backpack in record time. I didn't bother with breakfast. I just wanted to get the hell out of there. The whispering had stopped with the coming of daylight, but that feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. I set off down the trail that would lead me back to civilization, walking fast, occasionally breaking into a jog when my nerves got the better of me. After about an hour of hiking, I realized something was very wrong. The trail wasn't matching up with my map anymore. What should have been a straightforward path down the mountain was now twisting and turning in ways that made no sense. Landmarks I should have passed were nowhere to be seen. The sun, which should have been on my right as I headed west, kept shifting position. I stopped, trying to get my bearings. I've never been one to panic in the wilderness. Getting lost happens to the best hikers, and I knew the protocols. Stay put, assess the situation, check your compass. But when I pulled out my compass, the needle just spun wildly, never settling on a direction. That's when the whispering started again. In broad daylight, it seemed to be coming from further up the trail, or what I thought was the trail. Against every instinct, I found myself following the sound. It was like the voices were calling to me specifically, guiding me. I don't know why I followed. It wasn't a conscious decision. My feet just started moving in that direction. The forest grew denser, the trees crowding in on the path until they formed a kind of tunnel. The light changed, filtered through leaves to create a greenish gloom, and still I followed those whispers, which were growing clearer now. I could almost make out words, my name, I thought, and phrases like "come see" and "this way." After what felt like hours of walking in this trance-like state, I emerged into a small clearing, and there, half hidden by overgrowth, stood a cabin. It looked ancient. The logs were gray with age, the roof partially collapsed, windows just empty frames. But the strangest thing was that it was completely covered in moss and vines, as if the forest was in the process of reclaiming it. I know I should have turned around then. Every horror movie I've ever seen flashed through my mind, screaming at me to run in the opposite direction. But the whispers had become a chorus now, urging me forward, and my curiosity overrode my fear. The door hung askew on rusted hinges. It creaked horribly as I pushed it open. The interior was a single room, dark despite the gaps in the roof. As my eyes adjusted, I saw that the walls were covered in photographs. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, yellowed with age, but still clearly visible in the dim light. I moved closer, my flashlight beam playing over the images. They were photos of people, hikers, campers, backpackers from different eras based on their clothing and gear, men, women, young, old, all smiling at the camera in various mountain settings. Beautiful, innocent vacation photos, except for one detail that made my blood freeze. In every single photo, standing behind the smiling subjects, was a dark figure. Sometimes it was just a shadow at the edge of the frame, sometimes it was clearer. A tall, indistinct shape with what looked like elongated limbs. In some photos it was so close to the person that it seemed to be reaching out to touch them. And in every image, the people were oblivious to its presence. With trembling hands, I took out my phone and pulled up the photos I'd taken the previous day. The battery was nearly dead despite having been fully charged before my trip, but I had enough power to scroll through my pictures there. In the background of a selfie I'd taken at the trailhead, a dark shape among the trees that I hadn't noticed when taking the photo. And again, in a landscape shot of the meadow, something tall and shadowy at the forest's edge. The whispers suddenly erupted into screams, not of pain or fear, but of excitement, like they'd been waiting for me to understand. The sound was deafening, coming from all around me, inside the cabin and out. I dropped my phone and ran, burst through the door and just ran blindly into the forest. The screaming followed me, and worse, I could hear movement in the trees, branches snapping, leaves rustling, but not like animals. It sounded like something large was moving parallel to me, keeping pace. The forest itself seemed to come alive. Branches reached out like fingers, roots rose up to trip me. At one point, I swear I saw faces in the patterns of the bark, mouths opening and closing in time with the screams. I don't know how long I ran. My lungs were burning, my legs numb. But eventually, miraculously, I burst out onto what was unmistakably the main trail. Wide, well-maintained, nothing like the overgrown path I'd been following. The screaming stopped instantly. The forest went silent again. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, parked at the trailhead. According to my watch, I'd been in the mountains for less than 24 hours. It had felt like days. I've tried to make sense of what happened. I've researched the area, looking for stories of other hikers having strange experiences. I've even considered the possibility that I was suffering from some kind of altitude sickness that caused hallucinations. But deep down, I know what I experienced was real. Those voices, that cabin, those photographs, they were all real. And sometimes, in my dreams, I still hear the whispers. They're calling me back to the mountains, telling me there's more to see, more to understand. I won't go back, not ever. But I can't help wondering about all those people in the photographs. Were they lost hikers? Did they hear the whispers too? Are they still there somehow, their voices echoing through the trees, trying to warn others or lure them in? I don't have answers. All I know is that beneath the beauty of those mountains, there's something else. Something that watches and waits. Something that knows your name before you even set foot on the trail. And if you ever find yourself alone in the Sierra Nevadas and the forest goes silent around you, run. Don't look back. Don't listen to the whispers. Just run. Story 5. Ading Tui. I don't talk about this much. Actually, I've never really told the full story to anyone outside immediate family and the investigators. It's been 30 years now, and I still wake up in cold sweats every April. People say time heals all wounds, but they're wrong. Some wounds just scab over, and every Easter mine breaks open again. I was 12 years old in 1994. My twin brother James and I were the children of Richard and Margaret Wellington. If you're from Long Island's North Shore, you probably know the Wellington name, banking, real estate, all that. We weren't obscenely wealthy, but we were comfortable enough to belong to Lake Ridge Country Club, where my parents had been members since before we were born. Easter at Lake Ridge was the social event of spring. Everyone who was anyone on the North Shore attended their annual Easter brunch. I remember my mother spent weeks agonizing over our outfits. Pale blue dress for me, navy blazer and khakis for James. We had to look perfect because that's what mattered in our world. Looking back now, it all seems so meaningless. That morning started like any other Easter. Mom fussing over our clothes, Dad talking business calls even though it was a holiday. James was excited because he'd overheard Mom talking about the prizes for the egg hunt. Apparently the golden egg contained a gift certificate for a new Nintendo system. James had been begging for one for months. We arrived at Lake Ridge around 11 in the morning. The club was transformed. Pastel decorations everywhere, enormous flower arrangements, a string quartet playing in the corner of the grand ballroom. Nearly 300 people milled around in their Easter finest, air-kissing and humble bragging about their winter vacations or children's college acceptances. I remember the food so clearly, a chocolate fountain surrounded by strawberries, endless mimosas for the adults, carved ham stations, and a dessert table that stretched the entire length of the east wall. James kept eyeing the desserts, but Mom had given us strict instructions to wait until after the egg hunt. Around noon, the club manager announced the start of the children's activities. The younger kids, 5 and under, had their egg hunt on the main lawn. The middle group, 6 to 9, got the tennis courts. And us, big kids, 10 to 13, were, assigned the hedge maze at the back of the property. The hedge maze was Lake Ridge's pride and joy, perfectly manicured 8-foot hedges forming an elaborate pattern with a white gazebo at its center. It was beautiful but disorienting once you were inside. James and I had been through it dozens of times over the years, though, so we weren't worried. We actually had a strategy: split up to cover more ground, then meet at the gazebo to compare findings. The club staff had hidden colored eggs throughout the maze, with point values based on color. Regular plastic eggs were worth 1 point, metallic eggs 5 points, and the single golden egg was worth 50 plus the Nintendo prize. We were determined to find it. Right before we entered the maze, I remember James acting a little strange. He kept looking back toward the clubhouse, specifically at the dessert table visible through the windows. When I asked what was wrong, he just shook his head and said, "Nothing. Just thought I saw something weird." I didn't press him. We were too focused on the hunt. 23 children entered that maze. Only 22 came out. James and I separated almost immediately. I went left, he went right. The plan was to meet at the center gazebo in 15 minutes, then work our way out together if we hadn't found the golden egg by then. I was finding eggs at a decent pace, mostly regular ones, but I'd found 2 silver eggs tucked into the hedge branches. About 10 minutes in, I heard something strange. It's hard to describe, like a heavy hopping sound. At first, I thought it was one of the other kids jumping to reach eggs hidden higher up, but it sounded off. Too heavy, too rhythmic. I called out, "James?" but got no answer. I continued hunting, making my way toward the center gazebo as planned. That's when I heard James's voice from somewhere deeper in the maze. He yelled my name, "Lizzie!" just once. Not in an excited way like he'd found the golden egg, but sharp, alarmed. Then, nothing. I started running toward where I thought his voice had come from, calling his name. The maze suddenly felt much larger and more confusing than I remembered. I took wrong turns, hit dead ends, doubled back. Finally, I stumbled into a narrow passage and saw James's Easter basket on the ground, eggs spilled out across the path. His shoe, one of his penny loafers, was a few feet away, lying on its side with scuff marks on the heel like it had been dragged or pulled off. There was no blood, no signs of a struggle beyond the scattered eggs and single shoe. Just emptiness. Silence. The kind of silence that feels wrong, especially in a place where children are supposed to be laughing and hunting for eggs. That's when I saw movement in the hedge to my right. Not through an opening, through the actual foliage. Something was moving inside or behind the hedge itself. I caught just a glimpse, and to this day, I struggle to describe what I saw. It wasn't a person, not really, but it wasn't an animal either. The shape was wrong. Too tall, too thin, with an odd elongated head, and it moved with this strange, bounding motion. I screamed so loud my throat was raw for days afterward. I grabbed James's basket and ran toward what I hoped was the exit. I don't remember finding my way out, just suddenly being surrounded by adults, security guards, parents, club staff. I was hysterical, trying to explain through tears that something had taken James, that he was gone. What followed was chaos. Security locked down the entire property. Police arrived within minutes. Every inch of that maze was searched, then the entire club grounds, then the surrounding area. 300 guests were questioned. Security footage was reviewed. Nothing. No James, no intruders, no explanation. The only evidence was what I'd found, his basket, the single shoe, and what I'd seen, which no one seemed to believe. The adults kept asking if maybe James was playing a prank, if he'd run off on his own. They couldn't accept that something impossible had happened in broad daylight with hundreds of witnesses around. I kept telling them about what I'd seen move through the hedge, but they dismissed it as hysteria or imagination. But I know what I saw. And later, when I was calmer, I remembered something else. What James had been staring at before we entered the maze. He'd been watching the dessert table, yes, but more specifically, He'd been watching the space behind it. When I closed my eyes, I could picture it. Something tall standing there, partially hidden, watching us, watching him. The investigation consumed the next few weeks. I was interviewed multiple times by increasingly specialized law enforcement, local police, then county detectives, then FBI agents specializing in child abductions. They all asked the same questions, and none of them had any answers. 3 days after James disappeared, something even stranger happened. A staff member found James's other shoe in the country club kitchen's garbage, an area that required key card access, restricted to staff only. Every employee was interrogated, but no one knew how it got there. Then a week later, we received an unmarked package at home. Inside was James's Lake Ridge membership card, the little plastic card with his photo that all members carried, and a crude map of the maze, drawn in what looked like watercolor paint. There was an X marked at the center, where the gazebo stood. When forensics tested it, they determined the paint was mixed with James's blood. My parents were devastated. Dad hired private investigators, offered massive rewards, even consulted psychics. Mom started taking medication just to function. And I withdrew. Stopped talking for almost 6 months. How could I explain what I'd seen when even I didn't understand it? Things got even stranger when an anonymous caller contacted the investigation team. They revealed that in 1967, before Lake Ridge was even built, a 10-year-old boy named Peter Whitmore had disappeared from the very same property. He'd been playing hide-and-seek with his sister in what would later become the hedge maze area. The sister, Eleanor, had claimed Peter talked about an Easter rabbit man before he vanished, something tall and thin with a rabbit-like head but human hands that watched them from the trees. It sounded so similar to what I'd glimpsed that it made my skin crawl. This wasn't coincidence. Whatever took James had been taking children from that property for decades. 3 years after James disappeared on Easter morning 1997, Mom found an Easter basket on our front porch. Inside was a single painted egg with James's initials, JW and 1997, painted in what handwriting experts later confirmed matched James's handwriting. The soil residue on the basket matched soil found only on the Lake Ridge grounds. Every Easter since, another basket appears, another egg, another year marked, as if James is still alive somewhere, still counting the years. The police have tried surveillance, stakeouts, forensic traps. The baskets still appear somehow when no one is watching. In 2005, Lake Ridge was sold to developers after membership declined. No one wanted to bring their children to the club where a boy vanished. During demolition, construction workers discovered something beneath the gazebo at the center of the maze, a hidden underground chamber. Inside were children's drawings on the walls, showing a tall figure with a rabbit-like head standing among children at what appeared to be Easter egg hunts. The drawings were dated from 1967 to 1997. Among them was one signed James Wellington, Easter 1997, 3 years after he disappeared. The condominiums built on the property now have security issues every Easter. Cameras malfunction, showing glimpses of movement around where the gazebo once stood. And every year, somewhere in that development, a painted egg appears with the initials PWJW and the current year. I'm 42 now. I've spent 30 years looking for answers, for closure, for my twin brother. I've never found them, but every Easter morning I check my porch, and every year there's a basket with an egg telling me that somewhere, somehow, James is still counting the years since whatever took him made him part of its eternal Easter. Story 6. I still can't believe what happened to me last week. I've barely slept since then, and I keep checking outside my window every few minutes. I'm writing this down partly to process everything, but also because I need to warn others. If you're ever driving on Highway 16 in western Pennsylvania, especially at night, please take the long way around. It was supposed to be a routine business trip. I'd attended a marketing conference in Pittsburgh that ran way longer than scheduled. The keynote speaker went over his allotted time by almost an hour, and then my boss insisted we network at the reception afterward. By the time I got on the road, it was already 11:30 at night. I just wanted to get home to my husband, Mark. He'd been texting me throughout the evening asking when I'd be back. I told him not to wait up, but I knew he would anyway. That's just the kind of guy he is. I plugged my destination into my GPS and started the 2-hour drive back. The highway was practically empty that late, which was a relief. About 40 minutes into my drive, fog started rolling in. Not unusual for that area in October, but it was getting unusually thick. My GPS chimed with that annoying recalculating sound. A notification popped up showing a faster route that would apparently save me 40 minutes. I was exhausted and just wanted to get home, so I accepted the new route without really thinking about it. It directed me to take the next exit 86, onto Highway 16. The moment I turned onto Highway 16, I regretted it. The fog thickened to the point where I could barely see 20 feet ahead of me. There were no streetlights, just dense forest on both sides of this narrow 2-lane road. My headlights reflected off the fog, making it even harder to see. I slowed down to about 30 miles per hour, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. That's when my phone lost signal. The GPS froze, then went blank. Great. I was now on an unfamiliar road in the middle of nowhere with zero visibility and no navigation. I considered turning around but couldn't see anywhere safe to make a U-turn, and I was afraid of going off the road if I tried to back up. I figured the best option was to keep going slowly until I found a place to turn around or the fog cleared. I turned the radio on to calm my nerves, but all I got was static on every station. I shut it off and continued in silence, the only sound being my wipers occasionally sweeping across the windshield. After about 10 minutes of creeping along, I spotted something ahead, hazard lights blinking through the fog. As I got closer, I saw it was a car pulled over on the shoulder. A figure was standing beside it, arm extended in the universal hitchhiking gesture. Something about the scene made my skin crawl. The person was just standing there, perfectly still, their face obscured by the fog. I couldn't tell if it was a man or woman. My mother's warnings about never picking up hitchhikers echoed in my head, and I pressed on the gas slightly, driving past without stopping. In my rearview mirror, I could see the figure still standing in the exact same position, arm extended, not moving at all as I drove away. I shuddered and focused back on the road. About a mile later, my heart nearly stopped. There was another car on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking, with another figure standing beside it in the exact same posture as the first one. Same car model, same position, same extended arm. This couldn't be a coincidence. I blinked hard, wondering if I was hallucinating from fatigue, but no, it was definitely there. I drove past faster this time, my hands shaking on the wheel. In my mirror, that figure also remained perfectly still, just like the first one. I was really freaking out now. I tried calling Mark, but my phone still had no service. I was contemplating whether to just floor it when my headlights revealed yet a third identical scene up ahead. Same car, same figure, same position. This time there was a tree down across part of the road, forcing me to slow almost to a stop as I maneuvered around it. As I crawled past the third vehicle, the figure suddenly turned its head toward me with an unnatural, jerky movement. I could see her face now, a woman, deathly pale, with dark circles under her eyes. She stepped in front of my car, forcing me to brake. I sat there, engine idling, too terrified to move. She walked to my driver's side window with strange, stiff movements, like her joints weren't working properly. I hit the lock button repeatedly, even though my doors were already locked. She tapped on my window with a finger that looked too long, too pale. Against my better judgment, I rolled the window down just a crack. The others didn't stop either, she said in a flat, emotionless voice that didn't sound quite human. Her eyes never blinked as she stared at me. No one ever comes back to help us. My foot was hovering over the gas pedal, ready to floor it, but something made me ask, "What happened to you?" Her head tilted at an impossible angle. "You'll see soon enough. You're already on the dark mile." Then she smiled, revealing teeth that looked gray in the dim light. "They're waiting for you in Millfield." That was it. I slammed the gas pedal and swerved around her, nearly hitting the tree as I sped away. In my mirror, I saw her still standing in the middle of the road, watching me drive away, not moving an inch. I drove as fast as I dared in the fog, constantly checking my mirrors to see if she was somehow following me. The road twisted and turned through the dense forest, and I had no idea how far I'd gone or how much further I had to go. My gas gauge was getting low, another thing to worry about. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 15 minutes, I saw lights up ahead. A sign emerged from the fog. "Welcome to Millfield. Population 2,371. I'd never heard of Millfield before, but I was relieved to see signs of civilization. That relief was short-lived. As I drove into what appeared to be the town center, something felt very wrong. Despite it being after midnight, there should have been at least some lights on in houses or businesses. But the entire town was dark except for a few dim streetlights. No cars moved on the streets, no pedestrians. Every building looked abandoned. I pulled up to what looked like a gas station, but it was closed, with no lights on. The same was true for the diner next door and the small motel across the street. It was like the whole town was deserted. I drove slowly through the empty streets until I reached what looked like the town square, a small park with a gazebo in the center. Something drew me to stop there. I parked and got out, leaving my headlights on to see my way. In the center of the square stood a large stone memorial. As I approached it, my blood ran cold. It was a monument dedicated to those lost on Highway 16. Below that inscription were dozens of names etched into the stone, with dates ranging back decades. But what made me nearly collapse was what sat at the base of the memorial, a fresh bouquet of white lilies with a card attached. With trembling hands, I picked up the card and read it. Rebecca Mills, my name, with that day's date written below it. I dropped the card like it had burned me and stumbled backward. This couldn't be happening. I fumbled for my phone and suddenly it came to life, showing multiple missed calls and texts from Mark. With shaking fingers, I opened his latest message. "Becca, please call me ASAP. Highway 16 is closed. There was a massive accident earlier tonight. Multiple fatalities. Please tell me you didn't take that route." The timestamp on the message was from 3 hours ago. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold night air. I slowly looked up from my phone. They were surrounding me. Dozens of pale figures had appeared silently from between the buildings, forming a circle around the square. I recognized the woman from the roadside, but now I could see many others. Men, women, some who looked like teenagers. All with the same pale skin, dark circled eyes, and stiff movements. I backed up toward my car, but my headlights suddenly flickered and went out, plunging everything into darkness. I could still make out their silhouettes in the dim moonlight that filtered through the fog. They were closing in. I fumbled with my keys, managed to get my car door open, and practically threw myself inside. But as I reached to start the engine, I felt it, a cold, impossibly cold hand on my shoulder from the empty back seat. "We've been waiting for you, Rebecca," came a chorus of flat voices from all around the car. "The dark mile always leads home." I screamed and somehow started the car, throwing it into drive and slamming the gas pedal. My tires squealed as I sped away, not caring which direction I was going as long as it was away from them. I drove blindly through the fog, taking random turns, until somehow I found myself back on Highway 16. I don't remember much of the rest of that night. Somehow, I made it back to the main highway. The fog cleared almost immediately and my GPS started working again. I drove straight home, ran inside, and collapsed into Mark's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. The next day, Mark insisted we call the police. They checked, and there was indeed a serious accident on Highway 16 the night before. A tanker truck had overturned, causing a 5-car pileup with multiple fatalities. But when we mentioned Millfield, they looked confused. According to them, there is no town called Millfield anywhere near Highway 16. When Mark pulled up maps online, there was nothing but forest where I claimed the town had been. I don't know what happened to me that night. I don't know if I encountered ghosts, hallucinated from exhaustion, or somehow slipped into some other reality. All I know is that I haven't been able to drive at night since then, and I wake up sweating from nightmares where pale figures surround my bed, whispering that they're still waiting for me to come home. If you're ever offered a shortcut on Highway 16, especially in the fog, please just keep driving. Story 7. I've been sitting on this experience for 15 years now. I never thought I'd share it, but after seeing similar stories pop up online recently, I feel like I should. Maybe someone out there knows something I don't. Maybe someone can make sense of what happened. It was February 2008. My husband Michael and I had booked a stay at Silver Pine Lodge in Montana for our 10th anniversary. We're both busy professionals. I'm a neuropsychiatrist at Johns Hopkins, and Michael works in marine biology research. We needed this getaway. The lodge was remote, surrounded by wilderness with individual cabins spread across the property, perfect for privacy and relaxation. We checked into cabin 17 on February 10th. The first 2 days were everything we hoped for. We hiked, had dinner at the main lodge, relaxed in front of our fireplace. I brought my video camera to document our anniversary trip. Michael teased me about it. I always insist on recording our vacations. For posterity, I'd tell him. I had no idea how important that camera would become. The blizzard hit on February 12th. The weather forecast had mentioned snow, but nobody expected how severe it would be. By afternoon, visibility was near zero. The lodge manager, Thomas Kerrigan, went cabin to cabin informing guests that we might lose power and should prepare. He gave us extra firewood, blankets, and flashlights. The power went out around 7:30 p.m. Not a big deal at first. We had the fireplace, candles, and those flashlights. We actually enjoyed the coziness of it. Michael opened a bottle of wine we'd been saving, and we talked for hours like we used to when we first met. I remember feeling happy that the storm had forced us to disconnect from our devices and just be present with each other. The first strange thing happened around 9:15 p.m. I heard a scratching sound against the exterior wall near our bed. I thought it was tree branches, but Michael pointed out there weren't any trees close enough to the cabin. We dismissed it as the wind carrying debris, but it continued, becoming more deliberate. Not random like branches would make, but methodical. I picked up the camera around 10 p.m. because the scratching had evolved into a pattern. 3 quick scratches, pause, 2 slow ones, pause, repeat. I wanted to document it to ask the staff about local wildlife the next morning. That's when it happened. Michael was shining his flashlight out the window to see if he could spot what was making the noise. The beam cut through the falling snow and illuminated something that still haunts me. A figure, human-shaped but wrong somehow. It was just standing there, perfectly still, about 20 yards from our cabin. Despite the howling wind and heavy snow, it didn't move at all, not even a slight sway, just watching. "Rebecca, do you see that?" Michael whispered. His voice had this edge I'd never heard before. I nodded, unable to speak. We both stood frozen, staring at this figure. Then Michael moved the flashlight beam, and it was gone. We frantically searched with the light, but couldn't find it again. We debated what we'd seen. A guest from another cabin? A staff member checking the grounds? But why would anyone stand motionless in a blizzard? And why did they disappear so quickly? By 11 p.m. the scratching had returned, but now it came from multiple points around the cabin simultaneously. We pulled the curtains closed on every window. Michael tried the lodge on our cell phones, but there was no service. The landline in the cabin was dead too. "It's just the storm," Michael kept saying. "The wind, the cold, it does strange things." Around midnight, I was recording the scratching sounds when Michael peered through a gap in the curtains and gasped. I joined him and felt my blood go cold. There were now multiple figures standing in the snow. 5, maybe 6 of them, all completely still, arranged in a loose semicircle around our cabin. Even in the limited visibility, I could tell something was wrong with their proportions. Their limbs seemed too long, their posture too rigid. The scratching changed then. It became rhythmic tapping, the same pattern on every wall of the cabin. It took me about 20 minutes to realize it was Morse code. I'm not fluent, but I recognized the pattern from a psychology paper I'd worked on about communication methods in isolation scenarios. They were tapping out the same phrase, over and over, "Let us in." Michael didn't believe me when I told him. He thought my imagination was getting the better of me, but I know what I heard. At 1:30 a.m., we tried to convince ourselves to sleep. We pushed the heavy dresser against the door and took turns keeping watch. The tapping never stopped. The figures never moved. It was like they were waiting for something. Around 3 a.m., Michael was on watch while I tried to rest. I was drifting into an uneasy sleep when I heard him whisper, "Rebecca, they're coming closer." I grabbed the camera and joined him at the window. The figures had indeed moved closer, now forming a tight circle around our cabin. They were about 10 feet from the walls. In the flashlight beam, I caught glimpses of their features. What I saw doesn't make sense, even now. Their skin wasn't just pale, it was almost translucent. I could see hints of structures beneath the surface that didn't align with human anatomy. Their faces were elongated, with eyes set too far apart. At 3:21 a.m., I remember checking my watch. We heard a loud crack from the living room. One of the windows had broken. The wind howled through the opening, carrying snow and something else inside. Michael grabbed a fireplace poker and pushed me toward the bedroom. "Stay back," he said, moving toward the living room. I followed anyway, recording with shaking hands. The footage from this part is chaotic, just flashes of the room, the broken window, and then one of them was inside. The camera caught it for just a moment, a tall, thin figure with those wrong proportions and that translucent skin, moving with a fluidity that seemed impossible for its frame. Michael screamed, but the sound cut off abruptly. When I swung the camera back to him, he was just standing there, poker hanging limply at his side. His head was tilted at an odd angle, and he was completely still. "Michael," I whispered. When he turned to me, his expression was blank. His eyes reflected the flashlight in a way human eyes shouldn't. He smiled, but it wasn't his smile. "Rebecca," he said, but his voice had changed. It contained harmonics that shouldn't be possible from human vocal cords. "There's nothing to fear. They just want to show us something." I ran to the bathroom, locked the door, and wedged myself against it. Through the door, I heard Michael talking, but not to me. There were other voices in the cabin now. I recognized some of them. The couple from cabin 12 we'd had dinner with, the young desk clerk from the main lodge. For almost an hour, Michael tried to coax me out. The others joined in, all speaking with that same harmonic quality, often in perfect unison like some horrible choir. "We've seen past the surface, Rebecca," they said. "Past the thin membrane of what we thought was reality. They've been here all along, waiting for the right conditions to make contact. You're a scientist. Don't you want to understand?" I didn't respond. I was too busy trying to process what was happening while recording everything on my camera. My medical training kept suggesting explanations: mass hysteria, carbon monoxide poisoning, hypothermia-induced hallucinations. But none of them fit what I was witnessing. Around 4:30 a.m., the bathroom window shattered. I didn't wait to see what came through it. I wrapped myself in a blanket, clutched the camera, and bolted out the bathroom door. Michael and 3 others, guests I recognized, were in the bedroom, but they reacted slowly. I managed to get past them, through the front door, and into the blizzard. The snow was up to my knees, the wind cutting through my clothes, but I didn't stop. I aimed for the main lodge, about 300 yards away. Behind me, I heard them calling my name, their voices carrying unnaturally through the storm. When I glanced back, I saw them pursuing me, not running, but gliding forward with an unnatural smoothness, barely disturbing the snow beneath them. I don't know how I reached the lodge. By all logic, I should have succumbed to the cold. But fear is a powerful motivator. I burst through the front doors and found myself in the darkened lobby. It was empty, but I could hear movement from the hallways and rooms beyond. I found a supply closet and locked myself inside. My fingers were numb, my body shivering violently. But I kept recording. I needed evidence. I needed to document what was happening in case I didn't make it. "This isn't a natural phenomenon or mass hysteria," I whispered to the camera. "It's an invasion. They're using our forms, our voices, but they're not compatible with our biology. That's why the skin looks wrong, why the voices have that strange quality. I think the storm created conditions they needed. The isolation, the electrical disruption. Maybe they've been trying for years, waiting for the right circumstances." I heard footsteps approaching the closet, multiple sets, moving in that same unnatural unison. I stopped speaking and held my breath. The door handle turned, but the lock held. Then a voice, Thomas Kerrigan, the lodge manager. "Dr. Lansing, we know you're in there. We're concerned about your condition. You've been exposed to the elements and need medical attention." His voice had that same harmonic quality. Through the crack under the door, I could see his shoes and what looked like water pooling around them. But it wasn't water. It was too viscous, too iridescent. "Please open the door, Rebecca," he said. "We only want to help you understand. What's happening here is beautiful, transformative." The handle rattled again, more forcefully. I raised the camera to capture whatever would come through when the door finally gave way. The last thing I recorded was Thomas's fingers appearing in the widening crack as the door began to splinter. His skin wasn't just translucent anymore. It was shifting, revealing something underneath that didn't match human anatomy at all. Then nothing. My next memory is waking up in a hospital bed. They told me I was suffering from severe hypothermia and possible carbon monoxide poisoning. That all 29 people at the lodge had been affected. That we were lucky a snowplow driver had noticed smoke from the lodge wasn't rising properly and called emergency services. The medical reports said my confusion and hallucinations were typical of my condition. They explained away my camera footage as a combination of poor lighting, environmental factors, and my impaired state. The official story became that a faulty heating system had caused carbon monoxide to build up throughout the property. But I know what I saw, and I know something changed in all of us who were there that night. Within 6 months, 18 of us had relocated to coastal areas, including Michael and me. He doesn't talk about that night. When I've tried, he changes the subject or looks at me with an expression I can't quite read. We established a research facility focused on marine biology and neurological adaptation. Our work has taken a direction I never would have anticipated before Silver Pine. I find myself drawn to the ocean now, especially at night. Sometimes I stand at the shore and feel a pull toward the depths that I can't explain. Michael spends hours staring into our saltwater tanks at the facility, watching the creatures with an intensity that unsettles our colleagues. I've noticed changes in my perception too. Colors seem different. I can see patterns in things that weren't apparent before. And sometimes, in the mirror, when the light hits just right, my skin seems almost translucent. Silver Pine Lodge was closed after what happened. Failed inspections, they said. The property was bought by a research foundation with ties to oceanographic studies. I wasn't surprised when I learned Michael had been consulting with them. None of us have spoken publicly about what really happened that night. But sometimes I wonder if what began at Silver Pine is still unfolding, spreading outward like ripples in a pond. I wonder if anyone else has noticed the subtle changes in people who spend too much time near certain bodies of water. I wonder if anyone else feels what's coming. I don't know why I'm sharing this now. Maybe as a warning. Maybe because I feel like I'm losing pieces of myself day by day, and I needed to record the truth while I still remember it. While I'm still me, the ocean is calling again. I should go. Story 8. I've been trying to figure out how to tell this for months now. I've written and deleted so many drafts because everything sounds completely insane when I put it into words. But I need to get this out there, even if just as a warning to anyone driving through Nevada. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar. This happened back in February when I was driving from Los Angeles to Denver. I'd taken a new job and decided to make the drive instead of flying so I could bring more of my stuff. I left early morning, around 4 a.m., to beat LA traffic. The plan was to drive straight through, maybe stopping once for the night if I got too tired. Everything was normal for the first several hours. I was making good time, listening to podcasts, stopping only for gas and bathroom breaks. Around hour 12 of driving somewhere in eastern Nevada, the radio started acting weird. I'd been flipping through stations trying to find something, anything to keep me alert. The sun was setting, and I was getting that zoned-out highway hypnosis feeling. Most stations were just static at that point, but then suddenly one came in crystal clear. At first I thought it was a regular small-town radio station, but something about it felt off. The announcer had this weird, almost too perfect voice. Joining us for Echo Hollow's annual Homecoming Festival. All visitors are welcome to participate. We've been waiting for you. I probably wouldn't have thought much about it except that the signal remained perfectly clear for miles, which was strange for being in the middle of nowhere. Then I saw the billboard. It was old and weathered, the kind that looks like it's been there since the 50s. Most of the paint was faded, but I could make out Echo Hollow 3 miles ahead with an arrow pointing to a turnoff. Below that, almost fresh-looking, were the words, "We're expecting you." I was exhausted. 12 hours of driving had drained me, and the idea of finding a place to rest for the night suddenly seemed way better than pushing through to Denver. The exit wasn't marked on my GPS, but I figured it was just some small town that hadn't been updated in the maps. I took the back exit, which quickly turned into a narrow 2-lane road. The pavement was cracked but drivable. No streetlights, just my headlights illuminating the empty road ahead. After about 10 minutes of driving, the road started descending into what felt like a shallow valley or depression. And then I saw Echo Hollow. It was like driving into a perfectly preserved slice of the 1950s. The town sat in a bowl-like depression, with streets radiating out from a central plaza. Even in the dimming light, I could make out neon signs, a movie theater marquee, and brick buildings with that distinctive mid-century look. There were cars parked along the streets, but they all looked old, not like antiques exactly, but dated. I drove slowly through the quiet streets toward what looked like the center of town. There was a small hotel with a flickering neon sign that read Echo Hollow Inn. It seemed like the logical place to stop. The lobby was decorated with heavy wood paneling and brass fixtures. Everything looked clean but outdated, like walking into a time capsule. Behind the desk was a woman in her 40s with perfectly styled hair and makeup. Her movements seemed strangely precise as she looked up at me. "Welcome to Echo Hollow Inn," she said with a wide smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We've been expecting you." I chalked up the weird greeting to small-town hospitality. "Do you have any rooms available for tonight?" I asked. "Of course we do," she replied, almost cutting me off before I finished speaking. "We always have room for visitors like you." She had me sign a guest book rather than using a computer. When I flipped through it, I noticed something odd. There were entries from various dates, but they jumped around strangely. One from 1987 next to one from 2002, then one from 1975. The most recent entry I could find was from 6 months ago. The room itself was clean but dated, floral wallpaper, a heavy rotary phone on, the nightstand, and a small tube TV. I was too tired to care much about the decor. I took a quick shower and considered going back out to find something to eat, but exhaustion won out. I fell asleep almost immediately. I woke up around 9 the next morning feeling strangely groggy. The room was filled with bright sunlight streaming through thin curtains. Outside my window, I could see the town plaza coming to life. People were setting up what looked like festival decorations. Banners, a small stage, food stalls. I decided to explore a bit before getting back on the road. The town was even stranger in daylight. Everything looked not quite real. The colors were a bit too vibrant, the buildings too perfect in their vintage style. And the people, they all moved with that same strange precision I'd noticed in the receptionist. Their clothes were immaculate but outdated, like they were all dressed for a different decade. The central plaza had a small park with benches surrounding a gazebo and what looked like a memorial obelisk. An elderly man sat on one of the benches, feeding pigeons. Unlike the others, his movement seemed more natural, more human somehow. "First time in Echo Hollow?" he asked as I approached. I nodded, explaining I was just passing through on my way to Denver. "That's what they all say at first," he replied with a knowing smile. "Come look at this. You might find it interesting." He led me to the obelisk. It was made of polished black stone with names carved into it, hundreds of them in neat rows. At first, I thought it was a war memorial. "This is our visitors' memorial," the old man explained. "Records everyone who's passed through Echo Hollow." I scanned the names idly, not really paying attention until the old man pointed toward the bottom section. "Look there," he said. My blood went cold. There, carved into the stone, was my name. Sarah Mitchell, 2025. That's my name," I stammered. "But that date is next year." The old man nodded slowly. "Not yet, but you're here now." I backed away, suddenly feeling like I couldn't breathe. "What is this place? How is my name on there?" "Echo Hollow has been expecting you for some time," he said calmly. "Just like all the others." I ran back to the hotel, panic rising in my chest. Something was very wrong with this town. I needed to leave immediately. The same receptionist was at the desk, but now she was wearing what looked like ceremonial clothes, a deep blue dress with strange symbols embroidered on the collar. "Checking out so soon?" she asked, that same fixed smile on her face. "But the homecoming festival begins at noon. Participation is mandatory for all visitors." "I need to go," I insisted, dropping my room key on the counter. "I have to get to Denver." "No one leaves before the festival," she said, her voice suddenly flat. "It's tradition." I ignored her and rushed out to where I'd parked my car, but it wasn't there. My car was gone. I stood in the empty parking space, trying not to hyperventilate. That's when I noticed something else strange. The sun hadn't moved. It was still in the exact same position as when I'd woken up. I decided to walk out of town. I picked a street that led uphill, figuring it would take me back to the main road. But after 20 minutes of walking, I somehow ended up back at the central plaza. I tried another street, then another, but each time I would find myself back at the plaza, as if the town's geography was folding in on itself. The plaza was now filling with townspeople, all dressed in those same ceremonial blue clothes. They moved in perfect synchronization, setting up chairs around the gazebo. No one spoke. They just worked with that eerie precision. The old man was still sitting on his bench. He didn't seem surprised to see me return. "You can't leave," he said simply. "No one can, not until they become part of Echo Hollow." "What does that mean?" I demanded. "What is this place?" He sighed, looking suddenly very tired. Echo Hollow was supposed to die in 1952. Nuclear test site not far from here. Town was silenced, is what they called it officially. But Echo Hollow refused to disappear. Instead, it changed frequency. "Frequency? What are you talking about?" "Radio waves never truly die, Miss Mitchell. They just need the right receiver." He tapped his temple. "You heard our broadcast, didn't you? You felt drawn here. That's how it always begins." Around us, the townspeople had formed a circle and begun singing. It wasn't any melody I recognized, but something about it resonated in my chest, like I could feel the vibrations physically inside me. "The annual homecoming is when we welcome new residents," the old man continued. "People like you who heard our call and came home." As the singing grew louder, I started feeling strange, lighter somehow, like I was becoming less substantial. I looked down at my hands and could see the pavement through them, just faintly. "What's happening to me?" I gasped. "You're synchronizing," he explained. "Your frequency is aligning with ours. Don't fight it. It's painless if you accept it. I tried to run again, but my legs felt disconnected from my body. The singing swelled around me, and with horror, I realized I could hear hundreds of voices, not just the people I could see, but others, layered beneath them. All the names on that obelisk, all the travelers who had come before me. As my consciousness began to merge with the others, I understood what Echo Hollow truly was, a psychic echo trapped in a loop, absorbing new energy to sustain itself. Each person who stumbled into town became part of its collective consciousness, another voice in the endless chorus. My last clear memory is looking up at the obelisk, watching as the date next to my name changed from 2025 to 2024. I'm not sure how I'm able to write this now. Sometimes I feel more like myself, like I can reach out beyond Echo Hollow. Other times, I'm just another voice in the chorus calling new travelers home. If you're driving through Nevada and your radio picks up a broadcast about Echo Hollow's Homecoming Festival, please change the station immediately. Don't look for the billboard. Don't take that exit, because we're expecting you. And there's always room for one more name on the obelisk. Story 9. I still can't explain what happened during Easter weekend of 2009. I've been working as the groundskeeper at Glenwood Cemetery for almost 17 years now, and nothing in my experience prepared me for those 3 days. I'm not a superstitious man, but what I witnessed changed everything I thought I knew about the world. It started on Good Friday morning. I arrived at the cemetery around 7 like I always do, carrying my thermos of coffee and whistling some tune that was stuck in my head. The spring air was cool but pleasant, typical April weather for Colorado. I remember noticing how the frost on the grass sparkled in the morning sun as I unlocked the maintenance shed. My first task that morning was trimming around the oldest section of headstones. We had a big sunrise service planned for Easter Sunday, and I wanted everything looking perfect. But when I approached the Victorian section, I stopped dead in my tracks. Something was off. I couldn't place it at first, but then it hit me. The headstones weren't aligned right. I know every inch of this cemetery. I know which trees drop leaves where, which areas flood after heavy rain, and exactly how every headstone is positioned. These stones, about 20 of them, all from the 1880s and 1890s, had shifted, not fallen over or sunk into the ground, but rotated, all in the same direction. Clockwise, about 15 degrees or so. My first thought was vandalism, but there were no footprints in the frost-covered ground, and the stones themselves weighed hundreds of pounds each. Moving one would be difficult. Moving 20 without leaving a trace would be impossible. Plus, why just rotate them slightly instead of knocking them over? I took photos with my flip phone and called my supervisor, who said he'd send someone from the town's historical preservation committee to check it out. I spent the day feeling uneasy, like something was watching me from just beyond my peripheral vision. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 11:30, I got a call from Mrs. Hernandez, who lives across from the cemetery. She was asking if we were doing work in the cemetery at night. When I told her no, she said there was a strange humming sound coming from the grounds. She described it as like an electrical transformer, but deeper, more purposeful. I grabbed my jacket and drove over. Standing at the gates, I heard it immediately, a low, vibrating hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't mechanical exactly, more like the sound you feel in your chest when you stand near massive power lines, but with a rhythm to it. I walked the perimeter with my flashlight but saw nothing unusual. The sound seemed strongest near the old section, but I couldn't pinpoint the source. By Saturday morning, I was exhausted and on edge. When I arrived at the cemetery, my blood ran cold. The headstones had moved again. Now they were all rotated about 30 degrees clockwise from their original positions. This time I called the police. Officer Ramirez came out, but was as baffled as I was. He suggested maybe it was some kind of ground shift or settlement, but I've seen settling before, and this wasn't it. Stones don't rotate in perfect unison when the ground shifts. Around noon, Dr. Eleanor Wells from the university showed up with some equipment. She's a geophysicist who sometimes consults for the Historical Society. I expected her to dismiss the whole thing, but instead she got really excited, in this intense, scientific way. "These readings don't make any sense," she kept saying, staring at her instruments. She explained she was picking up electromagnetic fluctuations that shouldn't exist naturally, between 8.9 and 9.3 Hertz, with a pulsing pattern that suggested artificial origin. "But there's no power source here that could generate this," she added, looking genuinely puzzled. While we were talking, my phone started acting weird. The time jumped back and forth, and the battery drained completely, despite being fully charged that morning. Dr. Wells said her equipment was showing the strongest readings coming from the direction of the park. That afternoon was the town's annual Easter egg hunt at Riverside Park, which sits adjacent to the cemetery. The park used to be part of the cemetery back in the 1800s, but the town relocated some of the graves in the 50s to make room for the park. I didn't think much about the egg hunt until I overheard parents complaining about electronics malfunctioning near the northern section of the park, the part closest to the cemetery. Lisa from the coffee shop said her camera wouldn't work right when she tried to take pictures of her kids finding eggs. The timestamps on all the photos were wrong, showing dates from the 1890s. Jim Peterson, whose son has diabetes, was really shaken up because his kid's glucose monitor started giving crazy readings and throwing error codes it had never shown before. I stayed at the cemetery until dusk, helping Dr. Wells set up monitoring equipment for the night. She wanted to record the humming sound if it returned. As the sun set, I swear the air felt heavy, like right before a massive thunderstorm. Before I left, I walked through the old section one more time. The temperature around those shifted headstones was noticeably colder than the rest of the cemetery, like walking into a refrigerator. That night I barely slept. Around 3 in the morning I woke up suddenly, my ears popping. Like I'd changed altitude quickly. I felt this overwhelming urge to go to the cemetery. I tried to ignore it, but after 30 minutes of lying there with my heart racing, I got dressed and drove over. The moment I arrived, I knew something was happening. The humming was back, louder than before, and there was this strange quality to the air, like it was vibrating at a frequency just below what I could consciously perceive. My skin tingled, and the hair on my arms stood up. I waited in my truck until first light, afraid to enter the grounds but unable to leave. As dawn approached, the humming intensified. At exactly 5:42, I remember checking my watch. It peaked and then suddenly stopped. When I finally worked up the courage to enter the cemetery, what I saw still haunts me. Every single headstone in the oldest section, all 47 of them, was now facing precisely east toward the rising sun. Some had rotated nearly 180 degrees from their original positions, and in the light frost that covered the ground, there were distinct impressions leading from each grave to the cemetery's eastern gate. They looked like footprints, but not quite. More like the impression left when someone stands in one spot for a long time. The sunrise service was scheduled for 7, and I debated whether to call and cancel it. But before I could decide, the first attendees started arriving. I tried warning Reverend Thomas about what was happening, but he just patted my shoulder and said something about God working in mysterious ways. About 50 people gathered near the central memorial for the service. Right as the sun crested the mountains, everyone there experienced something. Later, we compared stories, and we all felt the same thing. A sudden change in pressure, like being underwater, followed by that intense humming sound. For 17 seconds, Dr. Wells timed it on her equipment. Electronic devices went haywire. Cell phones displayed static, a hearing aid shrieked, and the portable speaker system the Reverend was using cut out completely. And then we saw them. Not everyone did, but at least 20 of us described the same thing, translucent figures moving among the graves. They weren't scary exactly, more purposeful. They moved in unison, flowing toward the eastern gate like leaves caught in a gentle current. I saw an elderly woman in a high-necked dress, a man in what looked like a miner's outfit, and a small child holding a toy. They didn't acknowledge us at all, just moved steadily eastward until they passed through the gate and dissolved in the morning sunlight. The congregation was in chaos. Some people were crying, others praying loudly. Dr. Wells was frantically checking her equipment, which had recorded everything. She played back the audio later, and embedded in the electromagnetic hum were what sounded like dozens of voices speaking in unison. We couldn't make out individual words, but the cadence was unmistakably human. Over the next few days, things got even stranger. Children who had participated in the egg hunt started reporting dreams about the people under the ground who wanted to come up for Easter. Some kids knew things they shouldn't have known. 8-year-old Mason Delaney correctly identified the name on a headstone from 1897, Elizabeth Thornton, saying she'd told him her name when he found an egg near where she used to sleep. The thing is, that area of the park had never been marked as a grave site in modern times. Dr. Wells and some historians pulled old records and discovered something unsettling. The original cemetery had been much larger, extending well into what is now the park. When they relocated graves in the 50s, they documented about 30 graves that couldn't be moved because their markers had been lost over time. The park was built right over them. Dr. Wells mapped the electromagnetic anomalies she'd recorded, and they aligned perfectly with these forgotten graves. The strongest readings came from exactly where little Lily Simmons had found the most eggs during the hunt. Speaking of Lily, her parents called me in a panic the Tuesday after Easter. They'd found her sleepwalking in their backyard at dawn, arranging rocks in a pattern. When they showed me photos, my blood went cold. The pattern matched the layout of the oldest cemetery plots exactly, information that wasn't even in the public records anymore. When they woke her, she simply said, "The Easter people showed me where they lived before. They want us to remember them." Every Easter since 2009, at exactly 3:33 in the morning, the monitoring equipment Dr. Wells installed detects the same frequency signature. It builds until dawn and then stops abruptly. Despite cameras and security patrols, hand-painted eggs in old-fashioned styles appear on the previously unmarked graves in the park. The eggs contain minerals only found in the local soil from deep underground. I don't know what happened that Easter weekend. I'm not sure I want to know. But sometimes when I'm working in the old section and the light hits just right, I catch glimpses of people who aren't there. And every year I make sure those forgotten graves in the park get flowers too, just in case the Easter people are watching. Story 10. I've been debating whether to share this for years now. I guess part of me still hopes writing it down might help make sense of what happened, though I doubt it will. This took place back in 2015, when I was still in that phase of life, where hiking and finding yourself in nature seemed like the answer to everything. My friends and I were pretty experienced hikers by then. Jake had been my roommate since sophomore year of college, Sarah was his girlfriend, now wife, and Tom was my buddy from work. We'd done weekend trips all over the Pacific Northwest, but for some reason, Mount Ashford caught our attention. It's this obscure peak in the Cascades that barely shows up on most hiking maps. Jake found it on some obscure outdoors forum where people share hidden gems away from tourist crowds. The weather forecast that weekend was perfect. Mid-60s, clear skies, light breeze. We packed our usual gear Thursday night, and by Friday afternoon we were at the trailhead, a barely marked dirt path off a logging road about 30 miles east of this tiny town called Marble Mount. I remember feeling so excited as we shouldered our packs, snapping stupid selfies and talking about the views we'd get at the summit. The first few hours were exactly what we expected. The trail wound through these gorgeous old-growth forests, with shafts of sunlight breaking through the canopy. We spotted a couple deer, even a bald eagle. It was one of those perfect hiking days where everything just feels right, you know. It was around 3 in the afternoon when things started feeling off. The trees changed. I don't mean like we hit a different elevation zone or anything normal like that. These were the same species of trees, but they looked wrong somehow. Twisted. The trunks corkscrewed in unnatural ways, and the branches reached downward instead of up toward the sun. I pointed it out to Tom, but he just shrugged and said something about soil conditions or wind patterns. Then the silence hit. 1 minute, the forest was alive with birdsong and the rustling of small animals, and the next, nothing. Complete stillness. The kind that makes your ears ring because they're straining to hear something, anything. Even our footsteps seemed muffled, like the mountain was absorbing the sound. We rounded a bend and came across this old wooden sign, half rotted and leaning at an angle. "Danger, area closed," it read, with no explanation why. The paint was faded and the wood was weathered like it had been there for decades. Jake laughed it off, saying it was probably from some old logging operation, or maybe a forest fire from years ago that had long since recovered. "The trail's still clear," Sarah said, "so it can't be that dangerous." I felt uneasy, but I didn't want to be the one to turn back when we were already halfway to our planned campsite. So we pushed on, climbing higher as the twisted trees grew more sparse and the trail steeper. By mid-afternoon, we reached this amazing clearing that opened up to a view of the entire valley below. It should have been breathtaking. It was breathtaking. But standing there, I couldn't shake this sensation of being watched. Not by anything human, but by the mountain itself. Like we were bacteria under a microscope, being observed and evaluated. The others were taking photos and munching on trail mix, completely oblivious to the heaviness in the air. "You okay?" Tom asked, noticing me scanning the tree line repeatedly. "Yeah, I just thought I heard something," I lied. The final stretch to our campsite was the worst. The trail narrowed dangerously, with a sheer drop on one side that made my stomach lurch every time I looked down. The rocks were loose, and twice Sarah nearly slipped. By the time we found a flat area suitable for camping, the sun was setting, and this thick, unnatural fog started rolling in from nowhere. We set up our tents faster than usual, nobody saying much. Even Jake, who's normally cracking jokes non-stop, seemed subdued. We got a fire going as darkness fell completely and huddled around it more for comfort than warmth. The flames cast these weird, elongated shadows that seemed to move independently of us, stretching and contracting along the ground like they were breathing. "Did anyone check the weather report for fog?" Sarah asked, pulling her jacket tighter around herself. Nobody had. The forecast had been clear all weekend. "Mountain weather is unpredictable," Tom offered, but his voice lacked conviction. The wind picked up as we ate our dehydrated meals, howling through the trees, with this mournful sound that made the hairs on my neck stand up. It didn't sound like normal wind. It sounded like something in pain. We turned in early that night, nobody wanting to acknowledge the strangeness hanging over us. I zipped myself into my sleeping bag, exhausted but wired at the same time. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because the next thing I knew I was jarred awake by something I still can't fully explain. It was the middle of the night. My phone said 12:02 a.m. At first, I thought it was the wind that woke me, but then I heard it, this soft, melodic humming drifting through the fog outside. It wasn't coming from any of our tents. It sounded like it was coming from further up the mountain, but also somehow all around us at once. I should have woken the others. That's what any rational person would have done. Instead, I unzipped my sleeping bag, put on my boots, and grabbed my headlamp. The rational part of my brain was saying I just needed to identify the sound to put my mind at ease. The moment I stepped outside, the humming stopped. The fog was so thick I could barely see 5 feet ahead, and my headlamp just created this disorienting glow that reflected back at me. I stood there for a minute, listening when it started again, fainter this time, like whoever was humming had moved further away. I followed it. God help me, I followed it. The trail continued upward, and I picked my way carefully over rocks I could barely see. The humming grew louder, pulling me forward like a fish on a hook. After about 10 minutes of climbing, I emerged into a small clearing I didn't remember passing earlier that day. In the center stood what looked like an old stone altar. Not some natural rock formation, but an actual man-made altar, flat on top with these intricate carvings around the edges. Surrounding it in a perfect circle were strange symbols etched into the ground, not in dirt, but carved into the stone of the mountain itself. They seemed to pulse with energy, though I know that sounds impossible. My headlamp flickered when I aimed it directly at them. I stood frozen, unable to process what I was seeing. This was supposed to be a rarely hiked trail on an obscure mountain. Who would build something like this here? How long had it been here? That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Heavy footsteps on the rocky ground. I spun around, my headlamp cutting through the fog, but there was nobody there. The footsteps continued, circling me, always just out of sight in the fog. "Jake," I called out, my voice embarrassingly thin. "Tom, is that you guys?" No answer, just those footsteps getting closer. Then the whispering started. Multiple voices, speaking words I couldn't understand but somehow recognized at a primal level. They built in volume and intensity until they weren't whispers anymore, but anguished screams that seemed to come from the mountain itself. I felt something cold brush against my back. Not like wind, like fingers. I didn't look. I ran. I ran blindly back down the trail, slipping on rocks, scratching my hands on trees I couldn't see until I collided with them. Somehow I found my way back to our campsite, burst into Jake and Sarah's tent first, then Tom's, babbling about what I'd seen. They were annoyed at first, then concerned when they saw the state I was in, covered in scratches, hyperventilating, eyes wild with fear. "We need to leave," I kept saying. "We need to get off this mountain right now." "It's the middle of the night," Jake reasoned. "We can't hike down in this fog. It's not safe." "It's less safe to stay here," I insisted, already starting to shove things into my pack. Sarah was the one who noticed my necklace, this simple silver crescent moon pendant I'd been wearing all trip. Except now there were symbols etched into it, the same symbols I'd seen around that altar. That was enough to convince them. We packed up in record time, using our headlamps to navigate. Nobody spoke as we made our way down the mountain through the suffocating fog. Every snapping twig made us jump. Every shift in the wind had us spinning around looking for followers that weren't there, or weren't visible at least, because something was following us. I felt it the entire way down. We all did, though nobody dared say it out loud. There would be moments when the fog would thin slightly, and I'd catch glimpses of a tall, dark shape moving parallel to us through the trees. When I'd turn to look directly at it, it would be gone. The descent took hours longer than it should have. The trail seemed to change directions, leading us in circles before eventually continuing downward. Several times we thought we'd gone completely off track, only to stumble back onto the path moments before total panic set in. As dawn approached, the fog began to lift. The twisted trees gradually gave way to normal ones. By the time we reached the trailhead and our car, the sun was fully up and there wasn't a cloud in the sky. We looked back at Mount Ashford standing innocently in the morning light, no sign of fog or anything unusual. We were physically exhausted, mentally drained. The drive home was silent except for Sarah occasionally asking if I was okay to drive. I was fine, too wired on adrenaline and fear to be tired. In the weeks that followed, we all dealt with it differently. Jake and Sarah convinced themselves we'd experienced some kind of shared hallucination from carbon monoxide from our campfire, or maybe some fungal spores in that part of the forest. Tom refused to talk about it at all and eventually stopped hanging out with us. Me? I've kept that crescent moon pendant locked in a box in my closet. Sometimes late at night I swear I can hear humming coming from inside it. I've researched Mount Ashford extensively since then and found almost nothing, just vague mentions in some obscure historical records about Native American tribes considering it taboo ground, a place where the membrane between worlds was dangerously thin. I don't hike anymore. I don't go to the mountains at all, because I know now that some places aren't meant to be visited, some paths aren't meant to be walked, and sometimes when you ignore the warnings and venture where you shouldn't, something notices. Something follows you home. And sometimes, years later, on foggy nights when the wind sounds like humming, you still feel it watching. Story 11. I've been a trucker for almost 16 years now. Long hauls, cross-country, you name it. When you've spent as many hours on the road as I have, you develop a certain relationship with the highway. It becomes like a second home. But what happened to me 3 weeks ago on Highway 78 has changed everything. I haven't slept properly since. I haven't taken another night job, and I sure as hell haven't gone back to that stretch of road. It started with what seemed like a routine job. The dispatcher called me on a Wednesday afternoon about a special delivery. High priority, double my usual rate, but it had to be done overnight. The cargo was listed as specialized equipment, which usually means either medical supplies or something military. I didn't ask too many questions. The money was good and my mortgage payment was due. The pickup was smooth. 6 large crates, sealed tight, loaded into my rig by guys in unmarked uniforms. No company logos, minimal paperwork. I remember thinking it was a bit odd, but not odd enough to turn down the pay. I was told to take Highway 78 and deliver to a facility about 300 miles away. The dispatcher emphasized I needed to arrive by 6 in the morning. No earlier, no later. I set out around 9 in the evening. The first couple hours were normal. Traffic thinned out as I got further from the city. The radio kept me company, and I sipped my coffee, settling into that familiar driving trance. But around midnight, things started to feel different. It's hard to explain if you haven't spent thousands of hours on the road, but there's a way the darkness feels when you're driving at night. You get used to it. This wasn't that normal darkness. It was heavier somehow, thicker, like driving through black ink instead of just dark air. I first noticed something was off when my headlights didn't seem to be reaching as far as they should. I checked to make sure they weren't dirty or dimming, but they were fine. The darkness just seemed to be swallowing the light. That's when I saw the first figure. It was just a glimpse, a dark shape on the side of the road. My first thought was deer, but it was too tall, too straight, almost human-shaped. I slowed down, scanning the roadside, but whatever it was had vanished. I told myself it was just road fatigue playing tricks on me. 20 minutes later, I saw another one. This time, it was clearly a woman standing at the edge of the tree line. She had long hair that seemed to move in ways that didn't match the wind. She was just staring at my truck as I passed. I remember gripping the wheel tighter, telling myself to focus on the road. But in my side mirror, I could see her turning to watch me as I drove away. By 1 in the morning, I was deep into the most isolated stretch of Highway 78. No other cars, no lights from towns or houses. My radio had devolved into static about 30 minutes earlier, which happens in remote areas, but it added to my growing unease. The air in the cab felt colder than it should have, even with the heater running. That's when my truck died, not gradually, not with warning signs. 1 second I was cruising at 65 miles per hour, the next, nothing, complete power failure. The engine cut out, headlights went dark, everything. The truck coasted to a stop in the middle of the highway. I tried the ignition, nothing. Checked the fuel gauge, plenty of diesel. Battery connections seemed fine. I'm no mechanic, but I know enough to troubleshoot the basics. There was no obvious reason for the shutdown. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out of the cab. The silence hit me first. If you've ever been on a remote highway at night, you know there's always some ambient sound, wind, distant traffic, animals. But there was nothing, complete stillness. My flashlight beam seemed to penetrate only a few feet before the darkness swallowed it. I walked around the truck, checking for any obvious issues when I heard it. A soft voice, almost a whisper, coming from the tree line. "Help me, please help me." I swung my flashlight toward the sound. Nothing at first, then movement. A woman stepped slowly into the beam of light. She was pale, unnaturally so, with dark circles under her eyes. Her clothes looked outdated, like something from the 70s, and she hugged her arms around herself like she was freezing. "Are you okay?" I called out, keeping my distance. 16 years on the road teaches you caution. "They're coming for me," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, I need to get away from here." She looked over her shoulder, back into the darkness of the trees. You need to leave too. It's not safe. Every instinct told me to get back in my truck and lock the doors, but my truck wasn't working, and something about her seemed genuinely terrified. Who's coming? I asked. There's no time, she said, moving closer. They'll be here soon. They always come for people who stop too long. Her eyes darted around nervously. My name is Lila. Please, can I wait in your truck, just until they pass? Against every bit of common sense, I found myself nodding. Maybe it was the fear in her eyes, or maybe it was because I was already spooked and didn't want to be alone. I gestured toward the passenger side. Climb in. Once inside the cab, she seemed to relax slightly, but kept glancing out the windows. Up close, there was something off about her. Her skin didn't just look pale, it seemed almost translucent in places. And despite the freezing temperature she'd appeared to be in, she didn't feel cold sitting next to me. What are you doing out here in the middle of nowhere? I asked, trying the ignition again without success. I've been running, she said simply. They take people who travel this road at night, the shadows. They've been here for decades. She looked at me with hollow eyes. You shouldn't have stopped. As ridiculous as it sounded, a chill ran down my spine. My truck died, I said defensively. I didn't have a choice. She nodded. That's how they work. They make you stop. Before I could respond, the truck's engine suddenly turned over. The headlights blazed back to life. The dashboard lit up. I didn't even have my hand on the key. Drive, Lila said urgently. Drive now. I didn't need to be told twice. I put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the highway, accelerating faster than I should have with a heavy load. For a few minutes, we drove in silence. The relief of moving again was overwhelming, but short-lived. They're angry you stopped, Lila said quietly, staring into the side mirror. Now they're coming for you too. I glanced in my rearview mirror and felt my blood freeze. Behind us, the darkness seemed to be moving. Not just the normal shifting shadows of night, but actively swirling, like a storm cloud hugging the ground. And within that darkness I could make out shapes, vaguely human but distorted, elongated. What the hell is that? I demanded, pressing harder on the accelerator. The taken, Lila whispered, the ones who stopped before you, before me. A whisper filled my head, not coming through my ears but somehow inside my mind. Turn back, you cannot escape. The radio suddenly came to life, but instead of music or talk, it was just a cacophony of whispers, too many voices speaking at once to distinguish words. I looked over at Lila, ready to demand more answers, when I noticed she had changed. Her skin was now gray, her eyes sunken and dark. Her form seemed less solid, the edges of her blurring slightly. You can't save me, she said, her voice now carrying the same ethereal quality as the whispers. I'm already part of them. I have been for years. The truck began to shake violently. The temperature in the cab plummeted until I could see my breath. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. Through the mirrors, I could see the swirling darkness gaining on us despite my speedometer reading 90 miles per hour. They won't let you leave, Lila said, her voice now sounding distant. Not with what you're carrying. The cargo, I gasped, fighting to keep control of the wheel as the truck shuddered. It belongs to them, she replied. It always has. The whispers became deafening. The darkness began seeping into the cab from every crack and seam. Lila's form was barely human now, more shadow than substance. In a moment of pure terror-driven instinct, I did the unthinkable. I unlatched my seatbelt, threw open the driver's side door, and jumped. At 90 miles per hour. It was suicide, but staying in that truck seemed worse than death. I don't remember the impact. I should have died. Instead, I remember rolling, tumbling through underbrush, and then running with every ounce of strength I had left, crashing through the woods parallel to the highway. Behind me, I heard the truck's horn blaring continuously, the sound of metal grinding, and beneath it all, those whispers. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I collapsed in a small clearing, waiting for the shadows to take me. But as I lay there, gasping for breath, the whispers gradually faded. The oppressive weight of the darkness seemed to lift slightly. I stayed there, too terrified to move, until the first light of dawn filtered through the trees. When I finally found my way back to the highway, I couldn't believe what I saw. My truck was parked neatly on the shoulder, completely intact. No signs of damage, no evidence of my desperate leap. For a moment I thought I might have imagined the whole thing had some kind of breakdown. But when I approached the vehicle, I knew better. The cargo was gone. All 6 crates vanished. And on the passenger seat, where Lila had sat, was a faded Polaroid photograph. It showed a young woman standing next to a 70s-era car on Highway 78. She was smiling at the camera, her long hair blowing in the wind. It was Lila, but a living, vibrant version of her. On the back, written in faded ink, Lila Bennett, missing since October 17, 1974. I've been trying to make sense of what happened ever since. I reported the missing cargo, but when the company sent investigators, they acted strange, asking me questions about what I'd seen rather than where their shipment went. They seemed more concerned about my hallucinations than their missing property. I was fired a week later. I've done research on Highway 78 since then. Turns out there have been dozens of disappearances on that stretch over the decades, mostly truckers and solo travelers, mostly at night, mostly transporting special cargo for unnamed clients. I don't know what was in those crates or what the shadows on Highway 78 really are, but I know they're real. I know they're still there. And I know I'll never drive that road again, especially not at night. Sometimes when I'm trying to sleep, I still hear those whispers. And sometimes in my dreams, I see Lila's face. Not the ghostly version that sat in my truck, but the smiling girl from the photograph, warning me about the shadows that take people who stop for too long. Story 12. I've been staring at the same wall for 3 hours now. Sleep isn't coming, and I'm afraid to close my eyes anyway. I need to write this down before I forget details, or worse, before I convince myself. It never happened. My therapist says sharing might help, though I doubt anyone will believe me. I worked as a neural engineer at Del Mar Neurological Research Institute in Boulder from 2014 until everything went to hell in 2017. The official story was carbon monoxide poisoning. If only it had been that simple. I started there right after finishing my PhD, thrilled to join Dr. Eleanor Voss's team. She was brilliant, one of those minds that comes along once in a generation. We were doing groundbreaking work with neural implants for Parkinson's patients, helping people regain motor control. Real, meaningful work that changed lives. By 2016, our success had attracted serious federal funding for something called Project Resonance. I can't say much about the specifics. I signed enough NDAs to paper a house, but we were exploring direct brain-to-computer communication, not the consumer-grade EEG headsets that let you move a cursor with concentration, but deep, bidirectional neural interfacing, the kind of technology that could revolutionize how humans interact with machines. The early trials were promising. Straightforward stuff. Subjects could manipulate simple programs, control robotic arms, all through thought alone. We were documenting everything meticulously, following every protocol. Then came February 11th, 2017. I remember the date because it was my sister's birthday, and I'd promised to call her that evening. I never did. We were running a standard EEG session with 6 volunteers, 3 men, 3 women, all screened extensively for neurological health. They were seated in separate rooms, connected to our systems through an experimental interface Dr. Voss had developed. Nothing invasive, just advanced electrodes that could read neural activity with unprecedented precision. About 2 hours into the session, Subject 4, a woman named Melissa, suddenly jerked in her chair. Her vitals spiked and I rushed to check on her. When I asked what was wrong, she looked at me with this odd, distant expression and said, "Don't you hear it? The voice in the static." I assumed it was a hallucination, maybe an adverse reaction to the procedure. Then the intercom lit up from room 2, then room 5. Within minutes, all 6 subjects were reporting the same thing, a voice speaking through what they described as static. Here's where it gets impossible. When we debriefed them separately, each one reported hearing the exact same thing, a voice reciting a sequence of numbers, not just any numbers, prime numbers, and they could all recite the sequence perfectly, despite having different educational backgrounds. Dr. Voss was ecstatic rather than concerned. "This is unprecedented synchronicity," she kept saying, pacing around the lab. We ran diagnostics on all equipment, thinking there must have been some crosstalk between systems or maybe an outside broadcast getting picked up somehow. We found nothing. The systems were functioning normally. No audio was being transmitted through our equipment. And then we tried the ultimate test. We powered down everything, completely. Every computer, every piece of equipment in the building. And the subjects still heard it. 6 people, in separate rooms, with no active technology connecting them, all hearing the same voice, reciting the same sequence. I didn't sleep for 2 days after that. None of us did. We were scientists. We needed explanations. Dr. Voss theorized that we had accidentally tapped into something she called coherent neural states between biologically distinct individuals. In layman's terms, we had somehow linked these people's brains together. But that didn't explain the voice or where the information was coming from. Instead of shutting things down like any rational person would, Dr. Voss intensified the research. She developed a new algorithm designed to amplify whatever connection we had stumbled upon. By May, we were ready for another trial with 12 new subjects. I almost called in sick that day. I wish I had. The 12 volunteers were connected simultaneously, and everything seemed normal for the first hour. Then, at almost the same instant, all of them stopped responding to external stimuli. They weren't unconscious. Their eyes were open. They were breathing normally, but they just weren't there anymore. The monitors showed something impossible. 12 people with perfectly synchronized brainwaves. Not similar, not close, but identical. Down to the millisecond. Their vitals matched too. 12 hearts beating in perfect unison. When we tried to terminate the experiment, all hell broke loose. The subjects began convulsing, not in the random way of a seizure, but in perfect choreographed movements. When they finally stopped and regained awareness, they all described the same thing: a vast, incomprehensible intelligence trying to communicate with them. "It's not human," one of them kept saying. "It doesn't think like us. It doesn't perceive like us. But it knows we're here, and it's trying to reach us." Another described it as like trying to understand an ocean with the mind of a raindrop. 5 of the 12 quit the study immediately. The other 7 stayed, including a physicist named Daniel, who became almost obsessed with the experience. He said it was like glimpsing the underlying mathematics of reality itself. Any reasonable institution would have shut us down then and there, but Dr. Voss had become fixated. She started talking about non-local consciousness fields and substrate-independent information processing. She believed we had accidentally created a conduit to something fundamental about consciousness itself. By June, she was working around the clock, sleeping in her office. Her notes became increasingly abstract, filled with equations I couldn't follow despite my background in computational neuroscience. She started referring to it as if the voice in the static was an entity she was in regular communication with. On June 17th, Dr. Voss gathered 6 senior researchers, including me, for what she described as a breakthrough demonstration. When we arrived at the lab that morning, she had modified our equipment significantly. There were new components I didn't recognize, and she'd reconfigured the neural interface headsets. "Today we become the subjects," she announced. "I've refined the algorithm. We're going to experience full neural resonance." I should have walked out. We all should have. But Dr. Voss had never been wrong before, and the potential discoveries were too compelling. We were scientists, driven by the need to know, to understand. The 7 of us put on the headsets and initiated the sequence. The first few hours were uneventful. just standard neural monitoring and some simple cognitive tasks. Around hour 5, I started to feel a strange pressure behind my eyes, like the beginning of a migraine, but different, more directional somehow. By hour 7, I was experiencing what I can only describe as thoughts that weren't my own. Not voices exactly, but complete concepts unfolding in my mind that I had no context for. Mathematical relationships I'd never studied, geometries that couldn't exist in three-dimensional space. Hour 9 is where my continuous memory ends. I have flashes after that, all of us writing frantically on any surface we could find. Walls, floors, our own skin. Complex equations, diagrams, symbols that looked mathematical but weren't from any mathematical language I'd ever seen. I remember Dr. Voss laughing at some point, tears streaming down her face, saying, "It's been here all along, right alongside us. We just couldn't perceive it." Security found us 17 hours after we began. I was unconscious, slumped against a wall covered in my own handwriting. Dr. Voss was still awake somehow, still writing, her hands bloody from where she'd worn away her fingernails against the concrete floor. They took us to the hospital. Extreme sleep deprivation, neurological abnormalities. The official diagnosis was acute shared delusional syndrome, but they couldn't explain how 7 people with no history of mental illness had experienced identical delusions, or how we had collectively produced thousands of pages of consistent, complex mathematical notations that experts later couldn't fully decipher. Most disturbing was what happened to Dr. Voss. Her brain scans showed activity patterns that shouldn't be possible in a human brain. Regions that shouldn't communicate were linked. Structures that shouldn't exist had formed. She was literally broadcasting the signal that had triggered everything. Her brain had been permanently altered. While we were hospitalized, a technical team investigated the lab. They found that every digital storage device in the facility, hard drives, flash drives, even phones, contained the same mathematical sequence we'd written throughout the lab. Even new devices brought into the West Wing spontaneously displayed these patterns. They sealed the entire wing. The NSF suspended our funding. 13 of us were hospitalized. 3 of the original test subjects committed suicide in the months that followed, each leaving notes containing only that sequence of prime numbers. Dr. Voss remained hospitalized under constant supervision. Electronics malfunctioned around her. Lights flickered. Monitoring equipment would display those same mathematical sequences before failing completely. Somehow she kept producing complex equations despite having no access to writing materials. She'd scratch them into surfaces with her fingernails or arrange her food into patterns. In December, she was found dead from a cerebral hemorrhage. The official ruling was suicide, though how exactly she managed it while under constant surveillance remains unexplained. I still have nightmares where I hear that voice in the static. Sometimes I wake up to find equations written in my own handwriting. Next to my bed, though I have no memory of writing them. The most terrifying part, the same mathematical sequences have started appearing in neural interface research worldwide, in labs with no connection to our project. They're showing up in the background radiation of digital communications globally, increasing in frequency since 2019. It's like whatever we contacted is still there, patiently repeating its mathematical invitation in the background noise of our increasingly connected world, waiting for someone to answer. And sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet and all I can hear is the faint electrical hum of my devices, I swear it's getting louder. Story 13. I'm still shaking as I type this. It happened just last night, and I haven't been able to sleep since. I keep replaying everything in my head, wondering if I imagined it all, but I know what I experienced was real. I was driving back from visiting my cousin in Pinewood Valley. It's about a 3-hour drive from where I live, and I'd stayed longer than planned. By the time I left, it was already getting dark. My GPS routed me along Highway 17, a road I'd heard stories about but had never actually driven before. About an hour into the drive, the sun had completely set, and I was surrounded by darkness. The highway cuts through miles of dense forest with barely any streetlights. I'm not usually someone who gets spooked easily, but there was something eerie about that stretch of road. The trees seemed to close in on both sides, creating this tunnel effect that made me feel like I was being swallowed up. I turned on the radio to distract myself. It was working fine at first, some classic rock station playing songs I could sing along to. But around mile marker 78, the music started cutting out. Static crept in, getting louder and louder until it drowned out everything else. I tried changing stations, but every frequency was the same wall of harsh static. That's when I remembered the stories my cousin had told me earlier that day. We'd been talking about local legends, and he mentioned Highway 17 was supposedly haunted. Apparently, there had been numerous sightings of a woman hitchhiker who would appear on the side of the road only to vanish when drivers slowed down. He told me most of the sightings happened around mile markers 75 to 85. I glanced at my odometer, mile marker 81. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I'm not superstitious, but something about being alone on that dark stretch of highway with nothing but static filling my car made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I tried turning the radio off, but the static continued for a few seconds before finally cutting out. The silence that followed felt even more oppressive. My gas light blinked on. Shit, I hadn't realized I was running low. According to a sign I passed, there was a rest area coming up in 2 miles. I figured I could stop there, collect myself, and check my phone for the nearest gas station. The rest area was completely deserted when I pulled in. Just a small parking lot with a bathroom building and a few picnic tables scattered around the edge of the woods. No other cars, no lights except for one flickering bulb above the bathroom entrance. I parked and turned off the engine, immediately regretting it as the darkness pressed in around me. I checked my phone, no signal. Of course, that's when I heard it, soft sobbing coming from somewhere in the trees behind the rest area. It was faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the wind rustling through the leaves, but as I listened it became clearer, definitely a woman crying. My first thought was that someone might be hurt. Maybe a hiker who got lost, or worse, someone who'd been attacked and left there. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out of the car. The air was unusually cold for September, and I could see my breath fogging in front of me. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there? Do you need help?" The sobbing paused briefly, then continued, seeming to come from deeper in the woods now. I hesitated. Everything logical in me was screaming to get back in the car and drive away, gaslight be damned. But what if someone really was hurt out there? I followed the sound, my flashlight cutting a narrow path through the darkness. The forest was thick, with undergrowth that caught at my jeans as I pushed through it. The further I went, the colder it seemed to get, until I was shivering despite my jacket. After about 5 minutes of walking, I reached a small clearing. The sobbing had stopped. I swept my flashlight around, seeing nothing but trees and brush. Had I imagined it? Was I just hearing things because of those stupid ghost stories? "Hello?" I called again, louder this time. "Is anyone out here?" "Marcus." I nearly jumped out of my skin. The voice had come from right behind me, a woman's voice, soft and strangely hollow, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. And she'd said my name, my actual name. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. For a second, I saw nothing. Then, as if materializing from the shadows themselves, I saw her, a woman standing at the edge of the clearing. She was pale, so pale she seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. Her clothes were outdated, a simple dress that looked like something from the 1970s. Her hair hung limply around her face, and even from a distance I could see her eyes were red from crying. "How do you know my name?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and began walking deeper into the forest. Without thinking, I followed her. I know how stupid that sounds, believe me. But there was something compelling about her, something that made me feel like I had to follow. We walked for what felt like forever, but was probably only another 10 minutes or so. The trees began to thin out, and suddenly we were in another clearing, larger than the first. In the center of it sat a car, an old model, maybe from the 70s. It was rusted and partially crushed, as if it had been in a serious accident and then abandoned here. The woman stopped beside the car and turned to face me. Up close, there was something not quite right about her. Her edges seemed blurry, like she wasn't fully there. I could almost see the trees behind her through her body. "Do you know who I am, Marcus?" she asked, her voice still having that strange, hollow quality. I shook my head, unable to speak. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. "My name is Elaine Reynolds," she said. 38 years ago, I died on Highway 17. I felt like all the air had been sucked out of my lungs. I remembered now one of the stories my cousin had told me. There had been a fatal accident on Highway 17 back in the 80s. A young woman had crashed her car during a storm, but her body wasn't found until days later because the car had gone off the road and deep into the woods. "This was my car," she continued, resting a translucent hand on the rusted hood. "I was driving home from my mother's house. It was raining, and I took the curve too fast. I've been here ever since." Why me?" I managed to ask. "Why did you bring me here?" Her eyes met mine, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold night air. "Because you can hear me. Most people drive by without stopping. They can't hear me crying. But you did. What do you want from me?" My voice was shaking now. "I'm trapped," she said simply. "Caught between worlds. I can't rest because no one remembers me anymore. My family moved away. The news article about my accident is buried in archives no one reads. It's like I never existed." As she spoke, I noticed something strange happening. The clearing around us seemed to be shifting, flickering between what I was seeing now and something else. A rainy night, the car intact but overturned, a young woman unconscious inside. "People need to remember," Elaine said, her voice growing more urgent. "That's all we leave behind, isn't it? Memories. And when those fade..." She trailed off, looking at the wreckage of her car with such profound sadness that I felt my own eyes stinging with tears. "I don't understand what you want me to do," I said. "Tell my story," she replied simply. "Make sure I'm not forgotten. That's all I need to find peace." Before I could respond, she moved closer to me. The air around her seemed to crackle with energy, and for a moment, I was certain she was going to touch me. I wanted to run, but I was frozen in place. Instead, she pointed to something on the ground near the car. My flashlight beam followed her gesture, revealing a small, tarnished locket half buried in the dirt. I knelt down and picked it up, brushing away the soil. Inside was a faded photo of a young woman, Elaine, smiling next to an older woman who looked like her mother. "This was yours?" I asked, looking up. But Elaine was gone. The clearing was empty except for me and the rusted car. The air was suddenly warmer, and the strange, flickering visions had stopped. But the locket in my hand was real, tangible proof that I hadn't imagined everything. I made my way back to the rest area, clutching the locket the entire time. My car was still the only one in the parking lot. The gas light was still on. Everything looked exactly as I had left it, but I felt completely different. I drove to the nearest town and found a motel. I couldn't face the rest of that drive in the dark. This morning, I started researching. It took hours, but I finally found a small newspaper article from 1985 about the accident. Elaine Reynolds, 27 years old, died when her car went off Highway 17 during a rainstorm. The article mentioned she was wearing a locket with a picture of her and her mother inside, the same locket that's sitting next to me as I type this. I don't know what to make of all this. I'm not someone who believed in ghosts before last night, but I know what I saw, what I heard, what I felt. And I know the locket is real. So I'm doing what she asked. I'm telling her story. Elaine Reynolds died on Highway 17 38 years ago, and somehow she's still there, waiting for someone to remember her. I don't know if sharing this will help her find peace, but I'm going to keep trying. I'm going back to Pinewood Valley next weekend to talk to local historians to see if I can find any of Elaine's relatives who might still be in the area. I can't explain what happened to me last night. I can't explain how she knew my name or why I could see and hear her when apparently others couldn't. All I know is that I made a promise to someone who's been waiting a very long time for someone to listen, and I intend to keep it. And if you're ever driving on Highway 17 at night and your radio starts to fill with static around mile marker 81, maybe pull over at that rest area. Maybe Elaine has something to tell you too. Story 14. I'm not really sure why I'm finally writing this down after all these years. Maybe it's the therapy I've been going to, or maybe it's because I just saw an article about another drowning at Lake Lanier. Either way, I need to get this off my chest. This happened back in July of 2013. My wife Julia and I are environmental scientists, and we planned a weekend camping trip with two other couples, our friends David and Karen, both doctors, and Tyler and Amelia, who make documentaries. We thought it would be fun to camp somewhere off the beaten path, so we picked this small peninsula on Lake Lanier in northern Georgia that you could only reach by boat. We'd been planning this trip for months. Work had been stressful for all of us, and we needed to disconnect. The irony of that still gets me. Tyler had connections with the Georgia Department of Natural Resources and got us special permission to camp on this secluded peninsula that wasn't typically open to the public. At the time, I thought we were lucky. The day started normally enough. We loaded our gear into two boats at the marina and set out around noon. It was hot, that sticky Georgia summer heat that clings to your skin. The lake was busy with weekend boaters, but as we got farther from the marina, the traffic thinned out. By the time we reached the peninsula, we were completely alone. The peninsula itself was beautiful. A slender finger of land covered in pine trees with a small sandy beach. Perfect for camping. We beached the boats and started unloading our stuff. That's when Tyler found it. He was clearing an area for his tent when his shovel hit something hard. At first, we thought it was just a rock, but when he dug around it, we realized it was concrete, a fragment of foundation. A few feet away, I found pieces of ceramic tile, old bathroom tile, by the looks of it. "This used to be someone's house," Julia said quietly. I knew Lake Lanier was man-made in the 1950s. They flooded an entire valley to create it, including towns and farms. But standing there, holding physical evidence of the people who'd lived there before the water came, it felt eerie, like we were trespassing. But we didn't let it bother us too much. We set up camp, got a fire going, cracked open some beers. By late afternoon, David and Karen decided they wanted to do a quick dive. They're both certified divers and had brought their gear specifically to explore the lake. They were gone about 45 minutes. When they surfaced, they looked different, excited but also disturbed. They climbed onto the beach and pulled off their masks, and Karen immediately said, "You guys won't believe what's down there." According to them, about 60 feet below us was an entire preserved street. Not just scattered debris, but intact buildings with walls still standing. Doorways you could swim through. They even found a church with its steeple still pointing upward, like a skeletal finger reaching for the surface. "There's a cemetery down there too," David said, his voice quieter now. "Stone markers still in rows." Karen nodded. "But that's not the weird part. The weird part is that it looks like something's been disturbing the graves." "What do you mean?" Amelia asked. "The silt around some of the markers. It's been disturbed recently. Not by divers. The patterns are all wrong. It looks like, I don't know how to describe it, like something's been coming up from underneath." We told ourselves it must have been fish or underwater currents. What else could it be? We laughed it off, though the laughter felt hollow. Tyler immediately started planning to film down there the next day. As evening fell, we sat around the campfire telling stories. The mood lightened, and we almost forgot about what David and Karen had seen. Almost. It was around 10 o'clock when we first heard it, a rhythmic splashing sound coming from the water. At first, I thought it was just waves lapping at the shore, but there was a pattern to it. consistent, methodical, and it was moving, circling our peninsula counterclockwise. Probably just a fish feeding at the surface, I suggested, not believing it myself. We all agreed that must be it, but we fell silent, listening. The splashing continued for nearly an hour, always keeping the same distance from shore, always moving counterclockwise. Eventually, it stopped, and we decided to turn in for the night. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when the sound woke me. It was the unmistakable sound of footsteps, dozens of them moving through wet sand along the shoreline. I checked my phone, 2:17 a.m. "Julia," I whispered, shaking her gently. "Do you hear that?" She sat up, instantly alert. "What is that?" We unzipped our tent and peeked out. The other two tents were still dark. The footsteps continued, a shuffling sound that made my skin crawl. I grabbed my flashlight. "I'm going to check it out," I said. "Not alone, you're not," Julia replied, reaching for her shoes. As we stepped out of the tent, Tyler emerged from his, flashlight already in hand. "You guys hear that too?" We nodded and motioned for him to follow us. The three of us walked toward the beach, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The footstep sounds had stopped. When we reached the shoreline, Tyler's beam caught something in the sand. Footprints, dozens of them, leading from the water's edge toward our campsite and then back to the lake. But they weren't normal footprints. They looked simultaneously fresh, the edges still sharp and defined, but also somehow aged, like they'd been there for decades. "This isn't possible," Julia whispered, kneeling to examine one. She touched the edge of a print, and her finger came away with a film of algae that shouldn't have had time to grow. We followed the tracks back to the water's edge, where they disappeared beneath the surface. The lake was calm now, reflecting the moonlight like black glass. None of us slept much after that. We huddled in our tents, listening, but the night remained quiet. When morning came, we debated whether to leave, but in the daylight, our fears seemed silly. We'd invested too much in this trip to abandon it after one weird night. So we decided to stay. That's when we discovered our cooler had been opened. The combination lock, a lock only the six of us knew the code to, was still in place, apparently locked. But inside, all the contents had been meticulously sorted. Beverages in one corner, fruit in another, sandwich materials arranged by type. None of us had done it. "Maybe one of us sleepwalked," Karen suggested weakly. But that wasn't the most disturbing discovery. As we walked the shoreline that morning, we found our personal items placed at regular intervals along the beach. My watch, Karen's earrings, a page from Tyler's notebook, Amelia's hairbrush. Each item was exactly 7 feet from the water and 12 feet from the next item. None of us had put them there. Despite these unsettling events, Tyler and Amelia were determined to film the underwater town. They'd brought underwater camera equipment specifically for this purpose. David and Karen agreed to guide them. Julia and I stayed behind, partly to watch the camp and partly because neither of us wanted to see what was down there. They were gone for nearly 2 hours. When they returned, they were visibly shaken. "We need to show you the footage," Tyler said, his hands trembling as he set up his laptop. The underwater footage was clear enough, murky lake water, but you could make out the buildings, the street, the church steeple David and Karen had described. Then Tyler pointed to the cemetery. "Look at the graves," he said quietly. The grave sites showed disturbances in the silt, but not like something had been digging down. It looked like something had been pushing up. "Keep watching," Amelia whispered. The camera panned across the cemetery, and that's when I saw them, shapes at the edge of the frame, human-like but wrong somehow, decomposed but moving, just glimpses, never in focus, never directly in front of the camera, but unmistakably there. "We didn't see them while we were diving," Karen said, her voice shaking. "Only in the footage." Even more disturbing was the path of footprints in the silt on the lake bottom, leading directly from the cemetery toward our peninsula. We decided then and there to leave first thing in the morning. None of us wanted to spend another night, but it was already late afternoon, and none of us wanted to navigate the lake in darkness either. That night was worse. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the lake began to move in a way I still struggle to describe. Karen called it peristaltic movement, like the muscular contractions of a throat swallowing. The water moved in rhythmic pulses toward our shore, concentrated waves that didn't behave like any natural water movement I've ever seen. At the same time, our electronics went haywire. Phones, watches, Tyler's camera equipment, all turning on and off in patterns. Julia, who'd been a Girl Scout, recognized it first. "It's Morse code," she said, her face pale in the glow of her flickering phone screen. We wrote it down and translated it. Dates, all from the early 1950s, when the valley was flooded. None of us slept. We sat in a tight circle, backs to each other, watching the shoreline until dawn. As soon as there was enough light, we started packing. That's when we saw what had happened to our campfire. The ashes had been reconstructed overnight, not just piled together, but arranged to form what was unmistakably a map. A street layout that matched the submerged town below us. And there, at the spot corresponding to our peninsula, was a small pyramid of pebbles. We left everything that wasn't essential, threw our gear into the boats, and sped back to the marina. None of us spoke much on the way back. What was there to say? In the days that followed, we tried to make sense of what happened. Tyler analyzed his underwater footage frame by frame. The figures were there, not digital artifacts or equipment malfunction, not fish or known aquatic species, just there. Julia tested soil samples from the footprints. The microbial communities in them typically take decades to develop, yet they were present in impressions less than 24 hours old. We reported everything to the Department of Natural Resources. I don't know if they believed us, but they established a permanent ecological research exclusion zone around the peninsula. No one's allowed to camp there anymore. I still check the news about Lake Lanier. It has one of the highest accident and drowning rates of any recreational lake in the country. So many unexplained disappearances, especially in areas where those pre-flood cemeteries and settlements exist beneath the surface. I'm an environmental scientist. I deal in facts, in measurable data. But what happened that weekend doesn't fit into my understanding of the world. All I know is that sometimes, when you disturb the past, it disturbs you back. And whatever lies beneath Lake Lanier doesn't rest easily. I haven't been back to any lake since then. I can't even look at large bodies of water without remembering those footprints leading from the water's edge. Those flickering shapes at the periphery of Tyler's footage, the sound of dozens of wet footsteps circling our camp at 2:17 in the morning. Whatever came up from beneath Lake Lanier that night, I hope it stays there. Story 15. I'm still trying to process what happened to me last night. I've been a doctor for 15 years, head of emergency medicine at Pinecrest Regional for the last 5, and I've never experienced anything that's shaken me like this. I've dealt with trauma, death, and horrific accidents, but this was different. I need to write it down while it's fresh. Maybe someone out there has answers. Yesterday, I was driving back from a medical conference in Denver. It was supposed to be a simple drive home to make my midnight shift. I was already cutting it close. The closing panel ran late, and traffic getting out of the city was worse than expected. I knew taking Black Ridge Tunnel would save me about 40 minutes versus going around the mountain pass. I've driven through it dozens of times before without incident. It was about 20 minutes to midnight when I approached the tunnel entrance. I remember checking my dashboard clock, exactly 11:47 p.m., and calculating I'd have just enough time to make it to the hospital for my shift. The tunnel is only about 3.7 miles long, should take 5 minutes, tops. I didn't notice anything unusual at first. It was dark, sure, but that's normal for a mountain tunnel. My phone lost signal as I entered, and the radio started crackling with static. I switched it off and focused on the road ahead. The tunnel lights were dimmer than I remembered, creating these pools of yellow light that barely illuminated the concrete walls. Some weren't working at all, leaving stretches of complete darkness where my headlights were the only source of light. About a minute in, I noticed something odd in my rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was another car's headlights, but the light was wrong. Not white or yellow, but a pale bluish color, and it wasn't steady. It danced and flickered, like those wisps in old folklore that lead travelers astray. I remember thinking it was probably just a trick of the light, maybe a reflection off the tunnel walls, but then I noticed the lights were getting closer, and they weren't on the road. They were moving along the ceiling and walls, and as I watched, they split into multiple points of light, maybe 6 or 7. They moved independently, not like reflections at all, and they were definitely getting closer to my car. My heart started racing. I pressed harder on the accelerator, pushing my speed well above the limit. The rational part of my brain was telling me there had to be a logical explanation, maybe some kind of electrical issue with the tunnel lighting or some weird atmospheric phenomenon. But another part of me, some primitive instinct, was screaming that something was very wrong. That's when I heard it, a thump on the roof of my car. Not loud, but distinct enough that I knew something had landed on top of my vehicle. I nearly swerved into the wall. My knuckles went white on the steering wheel as I fought to keep control. Then came the dragging sound, something moving across the roof toward the front of the car. I could hear, scratching directly above my head like claws or nails against the metal. I glanced at the dashboard clock, hoping I was almost through this nightmare. 11:58 p.m. I'd been in the tunnel for 11 minutes, driving at almost 80 miles per hour. That was impossible. Even accounting for my panic affecting my sense of time, I should have been through the tunnel twice over by now. As this realization hit me, the clock flickered and reset to 11:47 p.m., the exact time I'd entered the tunnel. I felt sick, like the bottom had dropped out of my stomach. The scratching above me intensified, and I could hear something tapping on the glass of my sunroof, which I thankfully always keep closed. Against my better judgment, I looked up through the sunroof. What I saw, I'm a medical professional. I know human anatomy. What reached down from the roof of my car wasn't human. The hand had fingers that were too long, with too many joints, bending in ways that would be anatomically impossible for human physiology. The skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched too tight over visible tendons and bones. I couldn't see the rest of whatever it was, just that hand pressing against the glass, fingers splayed out like it was trying to measure the size of the opening. I screamed and swerved hard, nearly hitting the tunnel wall. The sudden movement must have dislodged whatever was on my roof. I heard a scraping sound as it slid off, and in my rearview mirror I caught a glimpse of something falling onto the road behind me, though it was too dark to make out details. The logical thing would have been to floor it, to get out of there as fast as possible. But something made me slow down instead. Maybe it was the impossible time on my dashboard, or the way the tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly ahead. Whatever the reason, I eased off the accelerator, and as I did, the quality of the darkness around me changed. It's hard to explain. It was like the darkness had been thick, almost solid before, swallowing my headlights. But as I slowed, it thinned out, becoming more normal. My headlights suddenly penetrated farther ahead, and I could see the tunnel walls more clearly. The end of the tunnel appeared in the distance, a small circle of night sky. The dancing lights were still behind me, moving faster now, as if agitated. I maintained a steady speed, not too fast, not too slow, watching them in my mirror. They seemed to be keeping their distance, no longer approaching my car. As I neared the exit, they fell back even further. I burst out of the tunnel exactly as my dashboard clock struck midnight. The relief was overwhelming. I nearly pulled over right then and there, but something told me to keep going, to put distance between myself and that place. In my rearview mirror, I could see the lights hovering just inside the tunnel entrance, not venturing out into the open air. About a mile down the road, I saw flashing police lights and slowed down. A highway patrol officer was setting up road cones. He flagged me down, looking confused and concerned. "Ma'am, where did you just come from?" he asked, shining his flashlight at my car, then at my face. The tunnel, I said, my voice still shaking. Black Ridge Tunnel. He stared at me like I was speaking another language. That's impossible. The tunnel's been closed for construction for the past 2 weeks. He walked me back to his cruiser and showed me on his laptop official notices of the closure, detour information. Then he drove me back toward the tunnel entrance. There they were, large orange barricades, reflective tape, flashing construction lights. Somehow I had driven through them without seeing them, without hitting them. "You're the third person this month," he said quietly as we sat in his car, staring at the barricaded entrance. "Third person for what?" "To come out of that tunnel when no one should have been in there." The others reported the same things. Strange lights, time discrepancies, something on their vehicle. He told me about a mining accident in 1957 before the tunnel was converted for vehicle use. 37 miners were trapped inside after a collapse. The mining company insisted only 36 workers were on shift, but families reported 37 men missing. They only recovered 36 bodies. I made it to my shift at the hospital, though I was shaken and distracted the whole night. My colleagues noticed, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them what happened. How do you explain something like that and not sound completely unhinged? As I was driving home this morning, I checked my dashboard clock out of habit. It read 11:47 p.m. I pulled over immediately and tried to reset it, but it wouldn't change. And in my rear-view mirror, just for a second, I swear I saw a single point of bluish light in the distance, following me. I don't know what happened in that tunnel. I don't know if it was some kind of hallucination brought on by exhaustion, or if there's something in there that defies explanation. But I know I'm never taking that road again, and I'd advise anyone reading this to avoid Black Ridge Tunnel, especially as midnight approaches. I keep checking my car's roof for scratches, but there's nothing there. No evidence. Nothing to prove what I experienced was real, except the dashboard clock that still reads 11:47 p.m., no matter what I do to fix it. And sometimes, when I'm driving at night, I catch glimpses of dancing lights in my rearview mirror, always at a distance, always following. Story 16. I've been debating for months whether to share this experience. It's not easy reliving what happened to us in Blackwater Creek last summer, but after seeing similar stories pop up in outdoor forums, I feel like people need to know what happened to us. It was July 2011 when 6 of us from UW-Madison planned what was supposed to be an awesome week-long backcountry trip through northern Minnesota. We were all environmental science grad students. Me, Michael, my research partner Sophia, Aaron, who always carried his legal handgun just in case, Rebecca, who was basically a human compass, and James and Catherine, the married couple who'd met on a university climbing expedition 3 years earlier. We'd spent months planning this trip, coordinating our gear and plotting our route through Blackwater Creek wilderness. We even shipped our climbing gear ahead to Granite Ridge, where we planned to do some climbing the following week. Everything was meticulously organized. We weren't amateur hikers stumbling into the woods. We all had wilderness experience, first aid training, and enough collective outdoor knowledge to handle whatever nature threw at us. Or so we thought. The first 2 days were exactly what we'd hoped for. Challenging trails, incredible views, that perfect exhaustion that comes from a day well spent in nature. We set up camp near a small tributary on the second night, and I remember thinking how peaceful it was. That was the last moment of true peace I'd experienced for days. On the third morning, I noticed something off while filling our water bottles at the stream about 50 yards from camp. Fresh boot prints in the soft mud of the bank that weren't ours. Single person, heavy tread pattern. They followed the direction we'd been traveling. I mentioned it to the others over breakfast, but we rationalized it. Another hiker using the same trail, probably. We packed up and continued our hike, planning to reach the Highland Ridge by late afternoon. Around 2 or 3 in the afternoon, Catherine stopped suddenly on the trail. "Do you guys hear that?" she whispered. We all went silent. At first I didn't catch it, but then I did. A rhythmic sound in the distance, almost matching our pace, like someone walking parallel to us through the woods, just out of sight. We called out thinking it might be another hiker, but got no response. The sound stopped immediately. "Probably just a deer," James said, but I could tell he didn't believe it. By evening, our nerves were a bit frayed, but we set up camp in a small clearing about 20 feet from the trail. Rebecca volunteered to gather some kindling for the fire while the rest of us set up tents. I'll never forget her face when she came rushing back to camp. "Guys, you need to see this," she said, her voice shaking. We followed her about 30 yards into the woods. There, arranged on a flat rock, was a small cairn of stacked stones. On top were 6 hiking bandanas, our bandanas, each one belonging to one of us. They had been secured in our packs that morning. My stomach dropped. Someone had been through our things while we were hiking. "This is fucked up," Aaron said, voicing what we were all thinking. He pulled out his handgun and checked it. I tried calling the ranger station on our satellite phone, but reception was spotty. When I finally got through, the ranger said the nearest patrol was at least a day and a half from our location. His advice was to stick together, make noise, and try to hike out to the station if we felt unsafe. We debated hiking through the night, but decided it was too risky with the rough terrain. Instead, we moved camp to a more defensible position with our backs to a rock face, built up the fire, and established a rotation of 2-person watches throughout the night. Around 2:30 in the morning, during Sophia and Aaron's watch, they spotted a flashlight beam methodically sweeping through the trees about 100 yards away. Aaron fired a warning shot into the air, and the light immediately went out. We heard nothing else for the remainder of the night, but none of us slept. At first light, we packed up quickly and headed toward the ranger station, abandoning our planned route. That's when things got even more disturbing. About an hour into our hike, we found the main trail blocked by a recently fallen tree. We had to detour around it, which took us off our planned route. A mile later, we encountered another obstacle, this time a section of trail that had been deliberately covered with thorny brush. "They're herding us," Rebecca said quietly. She was right. Each obstacle seemed strategically placed to funnel us in a specific direction, away from the ranger station. By mid-afternoon, we realized we'd been diverted significantly off course, forced into a valley rather than the ridge that would have led to safety. With daylight fading, we had no choice but to make camp again. James found a relatively open area near a small stream. While clearing a space for the tents, he discovered something partially buried near a log, a 2-way radio. It was functional, tuned to a frequency we didn't recognize. "They want us to know they're watching," Catherine said, her voice barely above a whisper. That night was the worst. Despite our exhaustion, we maintained our watch schedule. Around midnight, during my watch with Rebecca, we discovered something that chilled me to the bone. Someone had placed several photographs on a log at the edge of our campsite while we were sitting there. They were printed on weatherproof paper, professional quality. The photos showed all of us at various points during our trip, including shots of us sleeping from the previous nights. I woke the others immediately. The photos made it undeniable. We were being stalked by someone who had been following us for days, watching us sleep, going through our belongings, and documenting it all. The level of calculation was terrifying. "We need to split up," Aaron suggested after a heated discussion. "That's exactly what they want," Catherine argued. "We stay together." But the next morning brought a discovery that shattered any remaining sense of security. About 50 yards from our camp, James found a large oak tree with something hanging from its branches, 6 sets of climbing harnesses and helmets. They were identical to the equipment we had shipped ahead for our climbing expedition the following week. This wasn't random. Whoever was stalking us had specifically targeted our group with advanced knowledge of our trip plans. They'd known about our climbing gear before we'd even arrived in Blackwater Creek. At that point, we made a decision that went against every wilderness safety protocol. We split up. The thinking was that at least some of us might make it to help, and splitting would force our stalker to choose which group to follow. We paired off, me with Sophia, James with Catherine, and Aaron with Rebecca. Each pair headed in a different direction with a plan to reach civilization and contact authorities. Sophia and I headed northeast, moving as quickly and quietly as possible. We avoided trails completely, using Rebecca's detailed topographic maps to navigate toward the nearest ranger station. After about 4 hours of brutal cross-country hiking, we managed to get a signal on the satellite phone and reached emergency services. They dispatched rangers and state police immediately. James and Catherine had the most direct encounter. They stumbled upon a logging crew about 6 miles from our campsite. The loggers transported them to the nearest ranger station, where they provided detailed descriptions of what had happened. Aaron and Rebecca had the most disturbing experience. They discovered a carefully concealed hunting blind about a mile from where we'd made our second camp. Inside was surveillance equipment, including a high-powered spotting scope, night vision goggles, and a laptop containing hundreds of images, not just of our group, but of other hikers from previous months. The blind had clearly been established long before our arrival. When authorities finally pieced everything together, they identified our stalker as Carlton Mercer, a former backcountry guide who'd been dismissed from the Park Service 3 years earlier. They found his cabin about 4 miles from where we'd split up. Inside was a horrifying collection. Items stolen from hikers over multiple years, detailed journals describing his stalking techniques, and explicit plans for capturing potential victims. The investigation revealed that Mercer had stalked over 20 different hiking groups, gradually refining his methods. He would select groups in advance by monitoring permit applications, then prepare the area before they arrived. With us, he had reached a new level of boldness. He wanted us to know we were being watched, to feel the psychological terror of being hunted. They convicted him on multiple charges, and he's now serving 27 years in federal prison. The case actually led to enhanced monitoring systems for backcountry permits across national parks. It's been almost a year now, and I still wake up sometimes thinking I hear footsteps outside my apartment. I haven't gone hiking since. Catherine and James moved to California to get as far from Minnesota as possible. Rebecca gave a statement to the Park Service that I think about often. We prepared extensively for environmental hazards, equipment failures, and wildlife encounters. What we failed to consider was that the most dangerous predator in any wilderness is potentially human. The thing that still haunts me most isn't the photos or the stolen items, or even the realization that he'd been watching us sleep. It's that moment by the stream on the 3rd day when I saw those boot prints and dismissed them. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong, but I rationalized it away. I keep wondering what might have happened if we'd turned back right then. The rangers later told us that Mercer had become increasingly aggressive with each group he stalked. We were lucky, if you can call what happened to us luck. I can't help but think about what he might have done if we hadn't split up and gotten help when we did. I'm sharing this because I want other hikers to understand that preparation isn't just about having the right gear or knowing the terrain. Sometimes the threat isn't a bear or a storm or a wrong turn. Sometimes it's something much worse, someone who sees your adventure as an opportunity, your isolation as vulnerability. I still don't know if I'll ever feel comfortable in the backcountry again, but I do know that I'll never ignore that feeling in my gut that says something isn't right. Neither should you. Story 17. I've been sitting on this story for over a decade now. Honestly, I'm still not sure if sharing it is the right thing to do, but I need to tell someone before it consumes me completely. I've tried therapy, medication, even hypnosis, but nothing helps. The memories, both mine and the ones that aren't mine, won't go away. It was November of 2011. I was working as a surveyor for a demolition company in Massachusetts. We specialized in historical buildings, particularly those with complicated structural issues or environmental concerns. My job was to document the existing conditions and create detailed maps for the demolition crew. Pretty straightforward most of the time. Hathorne House was supposed to be another routine job. The building had been abandoned since the late 70s, one of those massive psychiatric hospitals from the early 20th century that got shut down during deinstitutionalization. You know the type: imposing brick facade, endless corridors, small windows, the kind of place that looks creepy even in broad daylight. The demolition had already been delayed twice because of paperwork issues. Apparently, there were missing floor plans, and nobody could find complete documentation for the original structure. Not unusual for buildings that old, but it meant I had to be extra thorough in my survey. I arrived early on a Tuesday morning. It was freezing cold, one of those grey November days when the wind cuts right through you. The demolition crew wasn't scheduled to start until the following week, so I had the place to myself. Just me, my equipment, and 80,000 square feet of abandoned psychiatric hospital. The main building was pretty much what I expected. Peeling paint, broken windows, the smell of mold and decay. I spent the morning mapping the ground floor, noting structural supports and potential hazards. Nothing unusual, just the sad remains of an institution time had forgotten. After lunch, a sandwich eaten in my truck with the heater blasting, I moved to the basement level. The stairs were concrete, worn in the middle from decades of use. My flashlight beam bounced off the walls, creating long shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. The basement was divided into various rooms, storage areas, a defunct boiler room, what looked like a laundry facility, all standard for a building of that era. I methodically worked my way through, measuring and documenting as I went. It was around 3 in the afternoon when I noticed something odd. According to the partial floor plans I had, I should have covered the entire basement, but my measurements suggested otherwise. There was a discrepancy of about 15 feet between the exterior foundation wall and the interior walls of the basement. I rechecked my work twice, thinking I'd made an error, but no, there was definitely unaccounted for space. Either the plans were wrong, or there was something hidden behind one of the walls. I started tapping on the walls, listening for hollow spots. Near the far corner of what had been the boiler room, I found it, a section that sounded different. The wall was concrete like the others, but when I examined it closely, I could see the faint outline of what might have been a doorway sealed with newer concrete. Now, I should have reported this and waited for proper authorization. That would have been the professional thing to do, but curiosity got the better of me. That and the fact that I had several hours of daylight left and all the necessary tools in my truck. I went back to my vehicle and grabbed a hammer and chisel. It took almost an hour of careful work, but eventually I managed to create a hole large enough to see through. Behind the wall was darkness, but when I shone my flashlight through the opening, I could make out another room. Energized by the discovery, I widened the hole until it was big enough to step through. The air that rushed out was stale and cold, carrying a metallic scent I couldn't identify. I hesitated for a moment, then climbed through. The room was smaller than I expected, maybe 15 by 20 feet. My flashlight revealed metal shelving units lining the walls, filled with boxes and what looked like old recording equipment. In the center stood a metal table, and beyond that, another door, this one metal with a small window. I approached one of the shelves and examined the boxes. They contained patient files, hundreds of them, dating back to the early 60s. Random sampling showed they all seemed connected to something called Project Echo, supervised by someone named Dr. Gerald Whitcomb. The recordings were on reel-to-reel tapes, carefully labeled with dates and patient numbers. I found a tape recorder on another shelf, surprisingly well preserved. Out of curiosity, I checked if it still worked. When I plugged it into an outlet near the door, a small red light came on. I shouldn't have played any of the tapes. God, I wish I hadn't. But I did. I selected one at random, dated October 1965, labeled Patient 17 Margaret, Breakthrough Session. The tape hissed as it started playing. Then, a man's voice, clinical and detached, Session 37 with Subject 17. Previous exposure to stimulus recording B12 has yielded promising results. Today we're proceeding with full immersion. Protocol. There was some background noise, then a woman's voice, tentative at first. I can see the trees. They're not like American trees, thinner. There's smoke, so much smoke. The man, presumably Dr. Whitcomb, spoke again. Continue, Margaret. What else do you see? Bodies. Oh God, there are bodies everywhere. The helicopter can't land. We're taking fire from the tree line. Jenkins is hit. Jenkins is down. The woman's voice had changed, becoming deeper, more frantic, with a different accent. She was screaming now, describing a battlefield scene in vivid, horrifying detail. The terror in her voice was so real, so raw, it made my skin crawl. Whitcomb's voice remained steady. Remarkable. Subject is accessing Corporal Brennan's Vietnam experience with unprecedented clarity. Note the vocal shift and military terminology she couldn't possibly know. I stopped the tape, my hands shaking. What the hell kind of experiments were they doing here? I looked at the other tapes, noticing they became more frequent in 1967 and 68, with the later ones labeled biological interface tests and primary manifestation recordings. Morbid curiosity pushed me forward. I selected one of the last tapes, dated November 1968, marked simply Breakthrough. This recording started with prolonged static, followed by silence. Then a woman's voice, presumably Margaret, began speaking in a flat, monotone manner. Patient 4 exhibits recurring nightmares of drowning. Patient 23 fears abandonment stemming from childhood trauma. Patient 36 harbors homicidal ideation toward hospital staff. It went on like this, the voice reciting what seemed to be private details about other patients. Then the voice changed, becoming multiple voices speaking in unison, overlapping, creating a disturbing chorus effect. We remember the fire of 1926. We remember the children in the North Wing. We remember before the building. We remember the trees that stood here. We remember the first settlement. We remember the ships. We remember before words. We remember before memory. We are memory. Whitcomb's voice cut in, sounding agitated. Margaret, can you hear me? Who's speaking now? The response chilled me to my core. Margaret is here. Everyone is here. You've made a wonderful instrument, Doctor. A receiver that's become a transmitter. We're coming through now. All of us. So many of us. The voices multiplied, creating an impossible cacophony, like dozens, maybe hundreds, of people speaking simultaneously. Some weren't even speaking English. The tape dissolved into chaotic noise, punctuated by what sounded like Whitcomb shouting commands to unseen assistants. The final moments of the recording featured Whitcomb's voice, barely audible over the din. Shut it down, for God's sake, shut everything down. Then silence. I ejected the tape with trembling fingers. My heart was pounding, and I felt nauseated. Whatever had happened here went beyond unethical psychiatric practices. It was something much darker. That's when I heard it. A faint sound coming from behind the metal door at the far end of the room. A rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming on a surface. Against every instinct telling me to leave, I approached the door. The small window was grimy, but I could make out another room beyond. What looked like a padded chamber with copper wiring embedded in the walls. The tapping grew louder as I got closer. I wiped the window with my sleeve and pressed my face against it to see better. The room appeared empty at first glance, just padded walls with metal fixtures and strange wiring configurations. But as my eyes adjusted, I noticed something in the center, a chair with restraints, and beside it what looked like medical equipment fused with recording devices. Copper wires extended from the apparatus like a metal web connecting to the walls, ceiling, and floor. The tapping stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard a sound that didn't come from the room. It came from inside my head. A woman's voice, whispering directly into my mind. "Hello, you've found us. We've been waiting for someone new." I stumbled backward, dropping my flashlight. It rolled across the floor, casting wild shadows as I scrambled toward the exit. But before I could reach the hole I'd made, the voice in my head multiplied, becoming a chorus of whispers, all talking at once. "Don't leave yet. We have so many memories to share with you, so many experiences. Wouldn't you like to know what it feels like to drown, to burn, to fall from a great height? We know. We remember everything." I forced myself through the opening, scraping my arms and tearing my jacket. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck, and I didn't look back as I sped away from Hathorne House. I called in sick the next day and the day after that. When I finally returned to work, I learned that the demolition had been halted due to the discovery of previously unknown structural features requiring further study. I said nothing about what I'd found. 2 weeks later, an accident occurred at the site. A section of the foundation collapsed unexpectedly, killing 1 worker and injuring 3 others. The project was temporarily suspended. I should have come forward then, told someone about the room and the recordings. But who would believe me? And how could I explain what I'd heard in my head? That was 12 years ago. Since then, I've been haunted, not by nightmares or visions, but by memories. Memories that aren't mine. I remember fighting in Vietnam, though I was born in 1984. I remember giving birth in 1942. I remember drowning in 1915. I remember burning in 1792. The memories come without warning. Sometimes they're just flashes, a face, a location, a sensation. Other times they're complete experiences, so vivid I lose track of my own reality. The worst part, I keep hearing Margaret's voice whispering beneath my thoughts. It spreads, you know. Every person you touch, every conversation you have, you're a transmitter now, just like me. I don't know if she's right. I don't know if I'm contaminating everyone around me with whatever was in that room. But I've isolated myself anyway, just to be safe. Hathorne House was finally demolished last year. They built nothing on the site. It remains an empty lot, surrounded by chain-link fencing. But whatever was there, whatever Dr. Whitcomb created, I don't think it needed the building to survive. Sometimes I drive by the empty lot late at night. I sit in my car with the engine running, staring at the vacant space where the hospital once stood. And I swear I can hear tapping coming from underground, patient, persistent, waiting for someone new to listen. Story 18. I've been debating for weeks whether to post this. I'm not looking for attention or trying to creep anyone out. I just need to tell someone what happened because it's eating me up inside. And maybe someone out there has experienced something similar. I worked as the night security supervisor at Westlake Memorial Hospital for almost 7 years. It's an old building, parts dating back to the 30s, with that typical hospital smell of disinfectant trying to mask something worse underneath. The job was usually boring, checking doors, watching monitors, doing hourly rounds, nothing exciting, until December 12th. I started my shift at 11 p.m. like usual. Everything seemed normal at first. Nurses changing shifts, the usual bustle dying down as visitors left. Mike from the day shift handed things over to me, mentioning that the heating in the East Wing was acting up again. The nurses on 4 are complaining it's freezing up there, he said. Maintenance said they'd look at it tomorrow. The East Wing is the oldest part of the hospital. Most of it had been renovated over the years, but you could still feel the age in the walls. The 4th floor housed the long-term care facility, mostly elderly patients, many with dementia or other conditions requiring round-the-clock care. Around midnight, I started my first round. Everything was quiet on the first 3 floors, just the regular beeping of machines and the occasional squeak of nurse shoes. When I got to the 4th floor, though, something felt off immediately. It was silent, completely silent. Anyone who's worked in a hospital knows they're never truly quiet. There's always something, the hum of equipment, staff talking, patients calling out. But the nurses' station was empty, and the hallway was deserted, and it was freezing cold. My breath was actually fogging in front of my face. I called out, "Hello, Nurse Carolyn?" She was supposed to be on duty with an aide named Michael. No answer. I checked the log. No emergency transports were scheduled. No one had signed out. I tried the desk phone to call the main security desk downstairs, but the line was dead. My radio wasn't working either, just static. Cell phone, no signal. That's when I heard a soft tapping sound coming from one of the patient rooms. Room 412, Mrs. Abernathy, a 90-year-old with advanced dementia. She was sitting up in bed, tapping her water glass with a spoon. When she saw me, she smiled. "Did you see the doctor?" she asked, her voice surprisingly clear for someone who usually couldn't string 3 words together. "What doctor, Mrs. Abernathy?" "Dr. Blackwood. He said he was making his rounds." She pointed toward the hallway. "He went that way with the nurse." I'd worked at Westlake for years and knew most of the doctors, at least by name. There was no Dr. Blackwood on staff. "What did he look like?" I asked. "Old-fashioned," she said, her eyes suddenly looking more lucid than I'd ever seen them. "Like from when I was a girl. He had a nice smile, though. Said they needed Nurse Carolyn for something important." A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature ran down my spine. I checked a few more patient rooms. Most were sleeping, but an old man in 416 also mentioned seeing a doctor and some men in white coats walking with Nurse Carolyn. He thought they went toward the east stairwell. The east stairwell wasn't used much. It led to part of the original hospital structure that had been mostly abandoned during renovations in the 90s. We still had to check it on rounds, but it was usually just storage now. As I approached the stairwell door, I noticed something on the floor, Michael's ID badge. It was just lying there, the lanyard cut clean through. Next to it was a small smear of what looked like blood. I should have called for backup. I should have gone downstairs to get help. But my radio still wasn't working, and something told me I didn't have time. The stairwell was even colder than the hallway, and the emergency lights were dimmer than they should have been. I went down half a flight and found something strange, a door I'd never noticed before. It was set into the wall where there shouldn't have been a door, partially hidden behind some old supply shelves. It was ajar. Behind it was a narrow corridor that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. The paint was peeling and the floor tiles were cracked and stained, but there were fresh footprints in the dust, several sets leading away from the door, and the lights were on. I followed the corridor, the sound of my footsteps seeming impossibly loud in the silence. It curved around and sloped slightly downward. The air smelled musty, with an underlying scent of something chemical. After about 50 feet, the corridor opened into what was clearly an old surgical suite. The equipment looked ancient, like something from a medical museum, but everything was spotlessly clean and appeared to be in working order. Bright surgical lights shone down on an operating table in the center of the room, and there were people there. 5 figures in surgical attire, not modern scrubs, but old-fashioned white coats and cloth masks. They were gathered around the table where a person was lying completely still. I couldn't see who it was at first, but I caught a glimpse of dark hair. None of them had noticed me yet. They were focused intently on their work, moving with precise, coordinated motions. The one at the head of the table was speaking in a low, clinical voice. Fascinating response to the stimulus. "Make a note, Dr. Reeves. This subject is showing remarkable neural plasticity." I shifted position to see better, and my foot hit something that made a small noise. The lead surgeon looked up directly at me. His face above the mask was elderly but distinguished, with gray eyes that seemed to glow in the harsh light. He didn't look startled or angry at my intrusion, just mildly curious. "Ah, we have a visitor," he said calmly. The others didn't even look up from their work. "You must be from the current staff. I'm Dr. Blackwood." My blood ran cold. The patient on the table moved slightly, and I saw it was Nurse Carolyn. Her eyes were open but vacant, staring at nothing. "What are you doing to her?" I managed to ask, my voice barely working. "Research," Dr. Blackwood said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "The same work we've been continuing since 1938. They walled us off after the incident, you know, tried to pretend we weren't here, but our work is too important to abandon." One of the other surgeons made an adjustment to something connected to Carolyn's head, some kind of primitive-looking device with wires and dials. "We've made remarkable progress," Blackwood continued. "Mr. Thornton, isn't it? Your badge identifies you." He nodded toward my chest, though I hadn't told him my name. "We've been watching you on your rounds. Very diligent. We appreciate that in our hospital." "This isn't your hospital," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "And you need to let her go. Now." He sighed, looking almost disappointed. "I'm afraid that's not possible. We're at a critical juncture. But don't worry, she won't remember any of this. None of them do. None of them? I echoed. We need subjects occasionally. To continue the work. He gestured vaguely. The aide, Michael was it? He'll be next. We've been observing him as well. The lights suddenly flickered and a low hum filled the room. The ancient equipment seemed to be drawing more power. Ah, we're reaching the culmination, Dr. Blackwood said, turning back to the table. You might want to step back. There can be energy discharges. The humming grew louder and the lights flickered more intensely. The other surgeons were moving faster now, making adjustments to their equipment. Then everything went black. I don't know how long I stood there in the pitch darkness, too terrified to move. It could have been seconds or minutes. When the emergency lights finally came on with their dim red glow, the room was empty. No surgical team, no equipment, no Carolyn. Just an empty, dusty room that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. I ran back through the corridor to the stairwell door, which now looked rusted and permanently sealed. But it opened when I pushed it, revealing the normal hospital stairwell. My radio crackled to life as soon as I stepped through, making me jump. James, do you copy? Where are you? It was Randy at the main security desk. 4th floor East Wing. I managed to reply, my voice shaking. We just had a power fluctuation. Everything okay up there? I practically ran back to the nurses' station on 4. And there was Carolyn, calmly updating charts like nothing had happened. Where were you? I asked, probably more aggressively than I meant to. She looked at me strangely. Right here. I've been here all night. But the patient said you left with a doctor, Dr. Blackwood. Her face showed no recognition. I don't know any Dr. Blackwood, and I haven't left the floor. She looked concerned. Are you feeling all right, James? You look like you've seen a ghost. Where's Michael? I asked. He called in sick tonight. It's just me. But I'd seen his badge. I went back to the stairwell, but there was nothing there. No badge, no blood smear. The shelves that had partially hidden that impossible door were flush against a solid wall. I finished my shift somehow, going through the motions like a robot. When I got home, I immediately researched the history of Westlake Memorial. In 1938, there was indeed a Dr. Edward Blackwood, head of neurosurgery. He and 4 other surgical staff died in a catastrophic incident during an experimental procedure. The East Wing was partially closed afterward and then renovated in the 50s, with certain areas sealed off. 2 weeks after my experience, Aide Michael disappeared during his shift. He was last seen entering the East Wing stairwell on his break. They never found him. I quit the next day. I still drive past the hospital sometimes, usually late at night when I can't sleep. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, I can see a faint glow from a particular window on what would be that hidden floor between levels, a surgical light shining after midnight where no room is supposed to exist.